If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21. Kain, where did you find all these amazing things? Carl asked, his eyes wide with amazement as he followed Kain into the Caltex auction house in Washington. Kain had been warming up these items for over 10 days, and the buzz they created had already attracted a number of art enthusiasts and collectors. The appraisers at Caltex were intrigued as well. According to one of them, the items might represent an undocumented piece of history, a simple statement that dramatically increased their value. My grandfather inherited them from his great-grandfather, and they've been stored in the deepest part of our basement for generations. If I hadn't stumbled upon my father's old notebook, I would never have known they existed, Kain replied casually, fabricating a plausible backstory as he continued to observe the auction proceedings. Although it was the early 21st century and auction technology was not yet as advanced as it would later become, even a prestigious auction house like Caltex retained a certain old-world charm. Kain's main interest wasn't in purchasing anything but in observing how much his items could sell for. His current assets were still modest, and his focus was on expansion, not personal indulgence. He knew that once his wealth multiplied 100 or 1,000 times over, he might consider engaging in the opulence that often corrupted those who came into power. For now, though, Kain was focused solely on developing his business and expanding his influence. Carl, on the other hand, was attending his first auction and was amazed by the variety of items on display. Despite this, he couldn't help but lament the absence of a collector's edition manuscript of Kid Lightning. The disappointment didn't last long, however, as he became more interested in the spectacle of the auction itself. The items Kain brought to auction were not particularly rare, but they were large and carried historical significance, making them valuable. Most of his collection consisted of jewelry, which he had already sold separately for more than $6 million. It wasn't quite the windfall he had imagined, but considering the lack of an official provenance, it was the best he could manage. As more pieces of his collection were sold, the smile on Kain's face grew brighter. He had originally anticipated earning around $3 to $4 million, given that a significant portion of the items were simple jewelry. However, by the end of the auction, he had managed to pull in nearly $9 million. Combined with the jewelry sales, Kain had made over $15 million in total, which was more than he had earned from stock investments over the past 3 years. On the flight back, Carl could hardly contain his excitement. Kain, you're a multimillionaire now. You should upgrade your car, maybe get a sports car that matches your new net worth. Kain shook his head, chuckling. Carl, I've been worth tens of millions for a while now. My car works just fine. I don't need to change it yet. Carl, however, didn't take the hint and continued to nag about sports cars until he eventually wore himself out and fell asleep on the plane. After returning to New York, Kain briefly returned to school to take care of some personal matters, but he soon took another month-long leave to focus on his business. His pharmaceutical wholesale and trading company had officially been established, and Kain had hired a few international businessmen to help manage operations. The company quickly began running smoothly, thanks to these professionals. Kain himself took charge of the finances, purchases, and warehouse management, ensuring everything was handled meticulously. He maintained strict control, especially since some of his trading partners came from other worlds. Kain knew the next logical step was to establish a biotechnology company. It was an idea he had been toying with for a while, though he hadn't yet decided on a specific research direction. I can't just build an empty shell of a company without knowing what to focus on, he mused to himself. Although he had a long list of personal goals, enhancing his physical strength, studying gamma radiation, or even achieving eternal life, Kain lacked the technical background to pursue these ideas directly. He had done well in high school, but his knowledge of biomedicine was practically non-existent. He knew that his role would be better suited as an investor and collaborator rather than a researcher. The funds and manpower for the biotech company were ready, and even the construction drawings for a research base had been prepared. However, Kain was still searching for a suitable project to invest in. Tony Stark. He wondered aloud, briefly considering collaborating with the genius inventor. But then something else clicked. The Extremis virus. The Extremis virus seemed like the perfect project for his biotech company's first venture. Aldrich Killian had likely been rejected by Stark late last year or earlier this year, meaning he and Maya Hansen had only just begun their research. Kain knew that both of them were geniuses in the field of biotechnology, and the Extremis virus represented a potential evolutionary leap for the human body. Most importantly, both Killian and Maya were experts in human biology. Kain could use their research to make deals with Orochimaru, a ninja with his own expertise in human evolution. The synergy between these researchers could yield groundbreaking results. If Kain could aid Orochimaru in making advancements in his work with Hashirama cells, it would bring Kain one step closer to achieving extraordinary power. If successful, he might not have to spend years stuck as a genin-level ninja. Still, the basics of chakra control could be useful to him. Techniques like the three-body technique or the shadow clone jutsu might be enough to keep him safe in minor skirmishes in the Marvel world. All Kain had to do was learn from the ninja world experts. As Kain mulled over his plans, he realized one key element was missing. I need an assistant, someone who can handle all the trivial matters perfectly. He immediately contacted a headhunting firm to find 2 capable assistants, which would free him from the burden of micromanaging everything. With assistants taking care of the day-to-day details, Kain would have more time to focus on the bigger picture, whether it was managing his pharmaceutical wholesale business, establishing his biotech company, or networking with Killian and Maya. The $15 million he earned from the auction was allocated wisely. Kain invested in materials to fill his space backpack, used some to fund the construction of his 2 companies, and entrusted a few $1,000,000 to his business associate Connor. While Carl was a close friend, Kain knew that Carl sometimes struggled with decision-making when Kain wasn't around, and he wanted to avoid any potential issues. By now, Kain's net worth had climbed to nearly $40 million, excluding his hospital shares. In just under 2 months, most of his wealth had come from trading with the ninja world. It was a rate of return that would be difficult to match through traditional means like the stock market. Weapons can wait, Kain thought as he reviewed his next steps. For now, I need to focus on securing production lines and planting cocoa trees. Once I've established myself, I can start thinking about building a private military force. For the time being, Kain knew he had to stay under Konoha's radar. Expanding his influence meant being cautious about attracting too much attention from powerful factions like the ninja villages. He would bide his time until the moment was right. Chapter 22. After Kain returned to the ninja world, Aya greeted him with good news. While he had been away for a few days, she had successfully negotiated with the commoners in 4 surrounding villages to begin planting cocoa trees. The incentive was clear: the cocoa beans would be bought at high prices, and in return, Kain's food store would offer them grains at lower prices. The math was simple, and the potential profit far outstripped what they could make by growing ordinary crops. As long as there's money to be made, even the commoners of the ninja world will jump at the chance, Kain thought, pleased with the outcome. The villagers had already agreed to plant cocoa trees, a positive step forward in his plans. Good job, Aya. It was definitely the right choice to put you in charge of the dessert factory, Kain praised her. Aya smiled, a bit embarrassed. It's nothing, really. It's what I should be doing. The news was indeed excellent for Kain, saving him time and energy. The dessert factory was nearly completed, and Kain had already discreetly moved the chocolate-making machines into the warehouse. He had done so without drawing attention, although a few people had begun speculating that he used some method akin to a sealing scroll. People from Konoha were already suspicious of his background, and such rumors only fueled their curiosity further. Once the production line was set up, Kain called Aya and 4 other workers over. He handed them the instruction manuals for the machines and proceeded to teach them personally how to operate the equipment. This is the switch. Press it, and the machine starts. Pour the raw materials here, and let it work its magic. Once the process is done, you package it, and voila, you've got chocolate, Kain explained patiently. After a few demonstrations, the workers began to grasp the basics, but Kain knew they needed more practice to fully master operating the machines. This step couldn't be rushed. When Kain expanded with branch factories in the future, these 4 would be the managers of those new locations, and Aya had even more important responsibilities awaiting her. Kain stayed in town for 2 more days, overseeing the workers and finalizing the cocoa tree planting plan. The first harvest wouldn't happen until the following year at the earliest, but it was a solid start. For now, the chocolate produced with the limited resources he brought would last for just over a month. He still needed to source milk and sugar within the ninja world. Next time, Kain planned to bring more raw materials into the ninja world in bulk, or perhaps he would create a special line of ninja chocolate. He mused about the possibilities: kunao-shaped chocolates, shuriken-shaped sweets, or fudge-shaped like forehead protectors. With some new molds, these novelty items would undoubtedly be popular. Ninjas commanded significant attention in this world, and whenever war erupted, it affected the livelihoods of entire countries. Once everything in town was settled, Aya headed back to Konoha. Upon reaching the gates, Kain and his convoy were briefly interrogated, but they were allowed entry without much delay. As Kain entered Konoha, he noticed an unusual atmosphere in the village. There was a mixture of joy and sorrow in the air, with many people dressed in black. It seemed as though they were mourning their fallen loved ones. Kain guessed that the ninjas who had fought in the Land of Rain had returned both the living and the dead and were being honored as heroes. Hero chocolate, perhaps? Kain briefly entertained the idea before shaking his head. Capitalizing on such tragedies would only invite trouble, with boycotts and conflicts sure to follow. After returning to his food store, Kain asked Miwa, the new store manager, to move all the goods into the warehouse. Miwa had taken over from Aya and had proven herself to be reliable, keeping the store running smoothly. Business was still good, but Kain knew that a single store in a village had its limitations. The desserts produced at the factory in town would eventually need to be distributed across the ninja world, reaching not only ninjas but also the wealthy merchants and nobles, whose numbers far exceeded those of the shinobi. Miwa-san, later on, arrange for deliveries based on the last reservation list. You can handle the rest, Kain instructed. After 3 days of non-stop work, Kain felt exhaustion setting in. Despite being worth tens of millions, he was still running his business himself, making him the least typical capitalist. Ever since he acquired the system, he hadn't had a proper rest. Noticing the weariness on Kain's face, Miwa suggested gently, "Boss, if you're feeling tired, perhaps a hot spring bath would help. It's great for relieving fatigue." In the ninja world, soaking in hot springs was widely recognized as a method of rejuvenation. There was even a small nation known as the Land of Hot Water, famous for its natural hot springs. Many believed that regular soaks could extend one's lifespan, an idea that attracted aristocrats and wealthy merchants from across the land. However, Kain was not convinced. In his view, all the talk about hot springs and longevity was merely a gimmick. "No thanks, Miwa. I'll just go rest in the back for a while. If anything comes up, let me know," he said, dismissing the idea of a hot spring bath. He headed toward the courtyard behind the store, not just to rest but also to contemplate his next steps. Orochimaru had likely begun researching forbidden techniques by now, as the Third Shinobi World War loomed on the horizon. At this point, Orochimaru hadn't yet experienced the death of someone close to him, which meant his obsession with immortality wasn't fully formed. Kain recalled that Orochimaru's initial dream had been to master every jutsu in the world. It was only after the death of Nawaka that his thoughts turned to eternal life. Orochimaru was undoubtedly gifted in biological research. He was naturally inclined toward this field, and in a span of 50 years, he would transition from being a shinobi to a leading expert in biological research. His advancements in gene transplantation, human cloning, soul transfer, and regeneration were impressive, culminating in his ability to rejuvenate his own body. And he had done most of it with only Kabuto assisting him. Kain calculated that within 6 years, Orochimaru would have made significant strides in human biology. By then, Kain could entice him into a partnership. Once Kain had amassed enough manpower and financial resources, Orochimaru would be instrumental in developing groundbreaking technology. Kain was confident he could share in the success of each stage of research. Moreover, if Orochimaru ever attempted to withhold findings, Kain could always recruit top experts from the Marvel world to further his own biological research endeavors. After some rest, Kain planned to enjoy a cup of black tea and unwind. The war was nearing its end, and Konoha would likely stop purchasing large quantities of medicine from him soon, given their depleted funds. Kain's next move would be to open a drug store in the Land of Fire. However, he wanted to hire a retired medical ninja from Konoha, someone with even basic medical ninjutsu skills. He'd have to ask Mirai about potential candidates. As Kain mulled over these thoughts, footsteps approached from outside. Miwa appeared at the door, saying, "Boss, Tsunade Jainin is here to see you. Should I let her in?" Chapter 23. To be honest, it was a bit inconvenient, but Kain got up and answered because he understood the value of Tsunade's visit. He let her wait outside for a while. After Kain changed his clothes, he welcomed Tsunade in. After they sat down, Kain asked, "Tsunade-san, what can I do for you?" He hoped it wasn't about medicine, as it would be inappropriate for Konoha to send Tsunade to him. Kain had always refused to mix business with friendship. Tsunade waved off his question with a smile, though poorly acted. "I just want to hear your opinion on something. After all, you are a master with some medical skills, and the battlefield first aid manual has some of your credit. Kain quickly shook his head, denying the compliment. I didn't do anything. It has nothing to do with me. You're too modest, Tsunade continued. Besides, I'm asking for a personal favor. It has nothing to do with Konoha officially, but as a friend, please help. I'll buy your chocolates. Kain raised an eyebrow and replied bluntly, we're not friends, Tsunade-san. And besides, chocolates are easy to sell. If you buy them all, the others won't have any, and they'll blame my store. He noticed that despite his straightforward answer, Tsunade continued smiling and showed no intention of leaving. Kain sighed, realizing she wouldn't be deterred easily. Fine, tell me what you need. But if it involves Konoha's government, I'll pretend I didn't hear it. You're really cautious, Tsunade remarked. She knew from her conversations with Grandma Mito that Kain wasn't hostile toward Konoha, but his reluctance to engage in its political matters was quite clear. It's about training medical ninjas. I mentioned it to Sarutobi-sensei in private, but he didn't seem interested at all. Reforming the medical system could greatly reduce the number of casualties among Konoha's shinobi. Don't you think I should bring it up at the next Jainin meeting? Surely, many would support it. Kain, however, was not optimistic. Give it up. It won't work, even if you have the backing of every Jainin. Why not? Tsunade asked, clearly unconvinced. This battlefield has already proven how important medical ninjas are. Kain leaned back in his chair and explained, I'm not an expert on war, but training medical ninjas will cost a lot of money and resources. Konoha isn't exactly flush with cash right now, are they? Remember, they paid me millions in Ryo just by handing over a few properties. Tsunade winced at the reminder. It was true, and the transaction had the flavor of exploitation. Beyond that, do you have any concrete plans? Kain asked pointedly. Tsunade was silent for a moment before she admitted, well, no detailed plan yet. I thought we'd discuss it. Kain shook his head. You should have at least a basic outline. What's your goal? How young do you start training? Will it be a new class in the ninja school or an entirely separate medical school? What are the selection criteria, the course syllabus, and the costs? And once they're trained, what's the incentive for people to become medical ninjas? What's their salary, and how does that compare to regular ninjas? Without those answers, even if the third Hokage wants to help, it'll be easy for him to find reasons not to. Tsunade was struck silent by Kain's questions. They made perfect sense, and her lack of preparation became glaringly obvious. However, she now felt inspired. You're right. I'll need to figure these things out. As thoughts whirled through her mind, Tsunade realized that Kain's words had given her a clear idea of what to do next. Kain sipped his tea and added, but don't get any ideas about asking me for more help. What I just said was to give you direction. The rest is your problem. Realizing Kain was politely showing her out, Tsunade chuckled. She hadn't expected much from him, but his advice had been invaluable. Still, she took her leave, though not without teasing, don't think you can get rid of me so easily next time. After Tsunade left, Kain sighed in relief. Dealing with her was exhausting, even though he had managed to avoid getting drawn into Konoha's affairs. Meanwhile, Tsunade rushed back to Konoha Hospital, brimming with ideas. She called two of her best medical ninjas, Yano and Kenji, to help her put together a detailed proposal. She began outlining everything Kain had mentioned: criteria for selecting medical ninjas, the difficulty levels of different medical techniques, and how to classify them in a practical way. Start with basic chakra control and minor healing techniques, Tsunade instructed. Then, gradually move into advanced areas like surgery and intensive care. If we standardize these courses, we can start producing skilled medical ninjas continuously. Her team worked diligently alongside her, and Tsunade took it upon herself to clarify the structure of medical ninjutsu. Healing jutsu was the most commonly used technique, but its requirement for precise chakra control made it difficult for most ninjas to master. She planned to develop a set of techniques that could be taught to a wider range of students, even those with less refined control. The more she worked, the more Tsunade realized that the training process needed to be rigorous. Carefulness and patience should be the primary traits we look for, she said aloud to herself. Maybe we should introduce basic medical training in ninja schools first, just to screen for those with natural aptitude. Tsunade knew that establishing a separate medical ninja school might be too much to ask, especially in Konoha's current financial state. She would need to be more realistic. Perhaps we can integrate medical training into the existing academy, she mused. We can start small test their healing abilities with simple tasks. By the time it was late into the night, Tsunade was still at Konoha Hospital, writing down notes and refining her plan. Many medical ninjas passing by were surprised to see her working so diligently. Normally, Tsunade would be at an izakaya or a casino at this hour, not stuck in the hospital. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, Tsunade paused, realizing that something was bothering her. She had been thinking about routine surgeries and felt uncertain about a particular detail. She considered going back to Kain's shop to ask for his advice but decided against it, given the late hour. Tisk, I also forgot to buy chocolate, she muttered to herself. I wonder how much Kushina has left in her stash. Tsunade's sudden craving for sweets distracted her from her work for a moment. She hadn't even bought any chocolate during her visit to Kain's shop, despite promising to clear out his stock. But the slight unease she felt didn't just come from forgetting to buy treats. Something deeper was stirring inside her, an unshakable sense of foreboding. Maybe it's just nerves, she said to herself, shaking her head. The war is over, so what could possibly go wrong now? Chapter 24. Master Tsunade, hurry up, go to the emergency room, your brother. Boom. Before the medical ninja could finish his sentence, Tsunade dashed past him, her footsteps creating a small crater in the floor as she sped towards the emergency room. Her heart pounded in her chest, fear and panic gripping her tightly. When Tsunade arrived, she found her brother, Noeki, on the brink of death. His injuries from the battlefield were severe, the detonation talisman had wreaked havoc on his body. Although the medical ninja on the scene had provided immediate care, they weren't skilled enough to stabilize him fully. Master Tsunade, one of the medical ninjas said, relief evident in his voice as Tsunade entered the room. The others, clearly overwhelmed by the severity of Noeki's condition, quickly stepped aside to let her take over. Tsunade barely had to look to assess the gravity of the situation. Noeki's body was littered with injuries, but the internal damage was far worse. The golden time, the critical window for life-saving interventions, was rapidly slipping away. Without wasting any more precious moments, she summoned 2 shadow clones to assist her and began administering 3 medical ninjutsu techniques simultaneously, pouring all her energy and expertise into the operation. If only she had perfected the regeneration technique earlier, she would feel more confident in her brother's survival. But there was no time for regret now. Luckily, the battlefield medics had done enough to keep him alive until she arrived. Without them, she knew she wouldn't even have had a chance to save him. Minutes passed. Then hours. As the procedure dragged on, Tsunade's chakra reserves began to deplete, and she had to ask her assistant to feed her special military ration pills to maintain her energy. The operation was grueling, stretching on for 7 or 8 hours. Finally, she completed the surgery, but by then, her chakra was nearly exhausted, and she slumped into a nearby chair, her willpower being the only thing keeping her conscious. The rest, you handle it. Clean, suture and bandage, Tsunade muttered, her voice weak but authoritative. She could barely lift her head as the medical team quickly moved to finish the operation under her guidance. Leave it to us, Master Tsunade, one of the medics said, taking over. Noeki, his body now wrapped in bandages from head to toe, still hadn't woken up. Tsunade knew the truth, though. Even if he regained consciousness, he would likely never be the same again. His injuries were so extensive that he might never become a ninja again, a devastating blow to a boy who had always dreamed of becoming Hokage. I know, thank you, Tsunade murmured as she stood up, her face pale and her legs trembling from the exertion. Despite her best efforts, she knew Noeki's chances of returning to a normal life were slim. His body was alive, but the future that he had once envisioned for himself was likely gone forever. The war had taken so much from them all. Yet, as Tsunade thought about the young medical ninjas who had treated Noeki on the battlefield, her mind was already racing. If there had been more trained medics, if they had been better prepared, then maybe Noeki wouldn't have been so close to death by the time he reached her. The need for medical reform within Konoha had never felt so urgent. As she stepped out of the emergency room, she crossed paths with Orochimaru, his eyes sharp and inquisitive. How is he? Orochimaru asked, his usual calm tone hiding the faintest hint of concern. He's stable for now, but we'll have to wait and see. Let's talk more about it later, Orochimaru. Tsunade was too exhausted to discuss it further and had to inform Grandma Mito as well. She barely had the energy to keep moving. Kain, meanwhile, remained unaware of the situation. In his timeline, Nawaka was supposed to die. The fact that Nawaka survived this time was a deviation, perhaps influenced by the presence of Kain's medical supplies, which had alleviated the pressure on Konoha's medical system. The abundance of medicine had allowed the hospital to treat more patients quickly and efficiently, helping them save countless lives, Nawaka's among them. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, had even sent additional medical support to the front lines, and it was that timely intervention that had kept Nawaka alive long enough for Tsunade to treat him. But Kain didn't know this. He was busy with his own plans. After a day of rest, he was in the process of discussing the purchase of 2 more properties nearby to expand his business. One would be a barbecue restaurant, the other an izakaya. Kain had noticed that Konoha's commercial district was still in its early stages, with shops and homes intermixed haphazardly. He envisioned building a proper commercial street, anticipating that the surviving ninjas, flush with war-earned ryo, would have money to spend once the economy rebounded. Once the war ended, these ninja would need food, clothing, housing, and entertainment. Kain was determined to meet those needs, starting with his new restaurants. In the back of his mind, he even considered the possibility of opening a casino in Konoha or, at the very least, in the Land of Fire. After all, what better way to help battle-weary ninjas unwind than a bit of high-stakes gambling? However, this would take time. First, Kain needed to secure the necessary properties, and he had left Miwa to handle the house purchases after learning that Konoha's higher UPS had overcharged him on previous transactions. Miwa, with her sharper business acumen, managed to complete the purchases at a far lower price than Kain would have paid. As Kain busied himself with these preparations, he was interrupted by a familiar face. Kushina. "Boss, are you here?" Kushina called out, stepping into the food store. "Yeah, but I won't be around for long. If you need something, talk to the new store manager." "She's handling things while I'm away," Kain replied, not looking up from his work. Kushina hesitated for a moment before approaching him. "Boss, I need to get a gift for someone who's bedridden, what should I buy?" "Fruit. There's a fruit shop in Konoha, you know where it is," Kain said absent-mindedly. Kushina frowned, shaking her head. "He's older than me, probably not a fan of fruit." Kain sighed inwardly, wondering why she was asking him for advice when he clearly wasn't the best at these things. After a moment's thought, he turned to her and said, "If you're not sure, just give me 100,000 ryo, and I'll prepare a suitable gift for you." 100,000 ryo. Kushina's eyes widened in shock. She immediately thought, is this boss trying to scam me again? Chapter 25. "Boss, your price is too much. How can a child have 100,000 ryo?" Kushina said indignantly. The amount seemed outrageous, and no student could possibly afford that. "Children? Nonsense. I've always treated you like any other customer. In this shop, you and I are equals. You pay, I deliver goods or services. There's no big or small between us." Kain's words, half boastful, half playful, made Kushina feel a little pleased. Everyone else saw her as a child, a troublemaker, or called her names like Tomato. Yet, here was the owner of the food store treating her as an equal. "Even so, 100,000 ryo is too expensive," Kushina's voice softened, though her right hand clutched her wallet tightly. Kain, a keen observer, noticed the subtle gesture. She really had 100,000 ryo. The truth was, Kushina had recently coaxed that money out of Tsunade. Tsunade had been in high spirits after receiving praise from many medical ninjas for her success in saving lives at Konoha Hospital. Kushina seized the moment, offering Tsunade a few pieces of chocolate and left with 200,000 ryo. Though she had already spent some, she still had 140,000 ryo left, and that day she had planned to spend a bit at Kain's food store. Kain, however, had other plans. His steep price tag of 100,000 ryo wasn't just about the gift, it was also about making Kushina understand the value of his unique products. 100,000 ryo is steep for someone with no income, Kain acknowledged. But the gift I have in mind is one of a kind in the entire ninja world. The dessert I'll make is worth every bit of that money. A unique dessert. Kushina's eyes widened. Her mouth watered slightly, and she swallowed with a gulp. She wondered if the experience of tasting something so unique was worth 100,000 ryo. "If you're not interested, I'll be on my way," Kain said nonchalantly, beginning to walk away. "There are many places outside the Land of Fire waiting for my business." Before he could get far, Kushina, with a determined look on her face, stepped in front of him. "I'll take it, boss," she said resolutely. 100,000 ryo, pay up first. Kain stretched out his hand. Though she had agreed, Kushina still felt a pang of regret as she slowly pulled out her wallet. 100,000 ryo almost emptied her savings. When she finally handed over the money, she did it reluctantly, nearly turning her head away from the sight. Once Nweki recovered, she vowed to make the money back. "Good. The deal is done. Wait here while I prepare it." Kain pocketed the money and headed to the back of the shop to begin baking the cake. "Boss, can I watch?" Kushina asked hesitantly. It wasn't just curiosity, she wanted to ensure Kain didn't run off with her money. "Sure, just don't get in my way," Kain replied as he fetched some ingredients from his space backpack and began his work in the kitchen. Kain had spent much of his time learning a variety of skills, including cooking and baking, during his solitary years. With his knack for picking things up quickly, he became proficient in making desserts, and even his previous companion, Carl, used to praise his efforts. Baking a cake wasn't a challenge for him, and as he worked, Kushina watched in awe. The cake was more intricate and beautiful than anything she had ever seen. The skill and craftsmanship that went into it were astonishing, and Kushina was now convinced it was worth the price. After finishing the cake, Kain stood back, satisfied. "That's all I can do with the materials and the price you paid. If you ever want something fancier, a 3-tiered cake with custom designs, it'll cost you more. Is there a better one?" Kushina asked, astonished. She had thought this cake was already impressive. "Of course. A high-end cake starts at 500,000 ryo. The more you pay, the better it gets. With my skills, it's not unreasonable to call me the god of desserts," Kain boasted, trying to plant the seed for future sales. Kushina took the cake and left, her heart lighter despite the cost. She was excited to bring it to Nweki, who was still recovering from his injuries. She knew that Nweki, Tsunade, and Grandma Mito weren't big fans of sweets, which likely meant she'd get to enjoy most of the cake herself. For now, the price felt worth it, though she knew in a few days, she'd probably regret spending so much. Once Kushina left, Kain packed up, ready to depart from Konoha. He visited the Hokage building to arrange for a B-rank protection mission before heading out. Konoha quickly dispatched a Chunin team to escort him, and with everything settled, Kain began his journey to his next destination, the underground gold exchange. Kain wasn't just interested in the exchange itself. His true target was Kakuzu, a powerful ninja known for his love of money. Kain had grand plans. He envisioned Kakuzu as both a financial manager and a bodyguard for his future ventures. With the casino idea in mind, Kain was confident that the profits would lure Kakuzu into joining him. Upon arriving at the town where his dessert factory was located, Kain checked in on the progress. Aya, the manager he had left in charge, had done an excellent job recruiting staff and managing operations, though more manpower was still needed. "Aya, I'm leaving this place in your hands. Here's 5 million ryo. Use it to buy 2 shops, one for a dessert store and the other for something a bit more luxurious." "I've got other plans for that one," Kain instructed. "And start taking in some homeless children. I'll provide for their food, drink, and education." Aya took the money and nodded. Kain's plan was ambitious. Alongside opening a dessert shop, he also intended to open a casino in another major area. With the technology available, he could bring in modern gambling machines from his world, making them a hit in the ninja world. The casino would not only make quick money but also allow him to build influence rapidly. With the ninja world's economy recovering from war, Kain's businesses were poised for success. He saw an opportunity to invest his resources wisely and continue growing his influence, using the funds from the ninja world to build a network of loyal followers. As he expanded, he knew that even greater ventures awaited. Chapter 26. "Guys, the next part of this journey is a bit private, so please wait here for me," Kain told the Chunin team guarding him. There was an underground gold exchange in the small town, a place he learned about from the owner of Lishun bookstore. The owner had connections with some noble backers, as Kain had assumed, given that they were able to afford a chain of bookstores across the Land of Fire. These backers likely had dealings with darker forces, like the underground gold exchange. Konoha was certainly aware of this place, but the village tended to turn a blind eye to it. The two sides had an unspoken agreement not to interfere with each other. In fact, sometimes even Konoha's own bounties found their way into the underground gold exchange, and when bounty hunters completed a mission, intermediaries from the exchange would send innocent people to Konoha to collect the reward. Additionally, many nobles in the Land of Fire utilized the underground exchange's darker services for their private matters. After Kain left, one of the genin in the group couldn't help but ask curiously, "Captain, what is our employer doing? Why all the secrecy?" "It's probably a private affair," replied another genin, their gaze wandering over to the food in front of them. The journey had been surprisingly comfortable so far. Every time they arrived at a town, they were treated to good food, warm beds, and sometimes even the luxury of a hot spring. This didn't feel like a typical mission at all, it was more like a vacation with occasional work. "Don't ask too many questions about the employer," the genin captain warned. "And besides, this town is special. If he doesn't want us following him, we respect that." Sensing the curiosity of his subordinates, the captain added, "This town has an underground gold exchange. Our employer is probably headed there. That place doesn't welcome shinobi from the 5 great villages, so if we followed, it would make things more difficult for him. Let's just wait here and enjoy the meal, he'll probably be back soon enough." The 3 genin exchanged glances, now understanding the situation. "An underground gold exchange, hey? I've heard of it but never seen one of them said. With their curiosity satisfied for now, the team focused back on their meal, eager to continue enjoying their unexpected luxuries. Meanwhile, Kain had arrived at the location of the underground gold exchange, cleverly disguised as a bathhouse. He was glad it wasn't hidden behind something as unpleasant as a toilet. He was a stickler for cleanliness and would have been uncomfortable in such a setting. After following the instructions provided by the owner of Lishun bookstore, Kain successfully navigated his way into the underground gold exchange. This wasn't where bounty hunters themselves came for jobs, instead, this was the place where bounties were posted and deals were made. Once inside, Kain quickly explained his purpose for being there and left after placing a rather unique request that raised some eyebrows. The bounty he placed was a substantial 1 million ryo and it had a specific target, Kakuzu. Known for his formidable skill set, including mastery over 5 elements, advanced ninjutsu, and his ability to prolong his life through his grisly techniques, Kakuzu was the perfect candidate for what Kain had in mind. He was also notorious for his obsession with money, making him a likely candidate for recruitment. Kain didn't need Kakuzu full-time, only as a muscle for hire when the need arose. Kakuzu, being a practical man, would have a hard time saying no to such a lucrative offer. After placing the bounty, Kain continued to visit various towns across the Land of Fire. This tour wasn't just for sightseeing, he was conducting thorough research on the region's economy and business opportunities. With a clearer understanding of the commercial potential in various areas, Kain was laying the groundwork for his future endeavors. Half a month later, Kain returned to the main town, ready to put his plans into motion. His time away had been fruitful, and he now had a more concrete vision of his path forward. Upon his return, the genin team that had been guarding him completed their assignment as agreed. The team members, despite their professionalism, seemed a little reluctant to leave. They had grown quite fond of the comfortable accommodations and lavish meals during their time with Kain. "Thank you for your protection during this journey," Kain said respectfully as the team prepared to depart. "It was reassuring to have you by my side. I hope we can work together again in the future." The leader of the genin team smiled and bowed in return. "The pleasure was ours, Kain-san. Until next time." As the Konoha team left, Kain's assistant, Aya, approached him. "Boss, there's someone who says you asked him to come. He's been waiting for 3 days. But, he's a missing nin, and he seems quite strong." 3 days, hey? That's earlier than I expected. Bring him in, Aya. I'm the one who called him." A few minutes later, Kakuzu appeared, visibly annoyed. "I've been waiting for 3 days, he grumbled. "If you weren't going to be here, you should have said something. I could have used that time to take care of other business." Kain responded by placing a small, heavy box in front of him. 2 million ryo, in addition to the 1 million I posted as a bounty for you. Consider it a meeting gift, Kakuzu-san. I want to discuss a long-term business arrangement." Kakuzu's annoyance faded quickly as he opened the box to reveal the neatly stacked banknotes inside. He didn't trust the amount without counting it himself, so he meticulously thumbed through the money, ensuring every ryo was accounted for. Kain patiently sipped his tea, accustomed to Kakuzu's obsession with money, while Aya looked on in disbelief. She had never seen anyone so fixated on money, to the point of ignoring everyone else in the room. Once Kakuzu finished counting and was satisfied, he leaned back and asked, "So, what's this business you're proposing?" "I'm not interested in anything that doesn't involve making money." Kain smiled and replied, "I'm planning to open several casinos across the Land of Fire. I want you to serve as a flexible guard and debt collector for these establishments. You won't need to stay there permanently, just be available when I need you to handle problems. For instance, if someone causes trouble or refuses to pay their debts, you step in. The minimum payout is 200,000 ryo per job, equivalent to an A-rank mission in any of the major villages." Kakuzu raised an eyebrow. "Casinos, hey? I'm not joining any organization or force, but if it's just this kind of work, I might consider it." Kain continued, "That's all I'm asking. You'll still be free to take on bounties from the underground gold exchange. This job won't interfere with that. You'll only be called in when absolutely necessary." With the offer on the table, Kakuzu leaned forward, his interest piqued. A deal like this, where he could make easy money without giving up his autonomy, was exactly what he was looking for. Chapter 27. Kakuzu finally agreed to Kain's proposal. The deal was beneficial to him and posed no risks. Even if complications arose, Kakuzu had the power to resolve them effortlessly. By cooperating with Kain's casino, Kakuzu was guaranteed a stable income. Even if no trouble occurred in a month, Kain promised him 3 million ryo. This condition improved Kakuzu's mood significantly. Although he wore a mask that concealed most of his face, his green eyes revealed a subtle satisfaction that both Kain and Aya could sense. For Kain, the 3 million ryo per month was a small sum. As long as his casinos operated smoothly, that amount would be a mere fraction of the total earnings. More importantly, having a powerful ninja like Kakuzu, who was cage level in strength, at his disposal was invaluable. To ensure efficient communication, Kakuzu arranged for one of his subordinates to stay in the town. This way, if the casino needed his assistance, he could return within a day or two, barring any long-distance missions outside the Land of Fire. In the early stages, Kain planned to open casinos in 2 key locations, the town and Main Street. He had already scouted the locations and sent Aya to handle the preliminary preparations and recruitment. During the 15 days Kain was away, his dessert factory had also made significant progress. They had successfully produced desserts that matched the flavors of the samples Kain had brought. The recipe and raw materials remained consistent, ensuring the quality of the products. Kain was particularly pleased with the factory's performance, but he was aware that the raw material supply was limited. The first batch of chocolates was soon ready for distribution. Part of it would be sent to Kain's food store in Konoha, while the rest would be sold locally. The pricing matched that of Konoha's market, which wasn't cheap. Kain's business strategy was clear from the start: while most civilians would focus on basic necessities, there would always be those willing to spend extra on luxury items like sweets, allowing him to profit. After handling matters in the ninja world, Kain returned to the Marvel world. There, his pharmaceutical wholesale and trading company had been operating smoothly in his absence. His sales team had secured 3 deals, bringing in the company's first substantial income. Furthermore, market research revealed a strong demand for medicines in several countries. If Kain's company could dominate those markets, the business could generate annual revenues of $500 to $600 million. Kain encouraged his team to continue expanding, especially through aggressive recruitment efforts. He also took time to interview 3 potential assistants, eventually hiring one to act as his administrative assistant. This person would oversee daily operations and ensure that Kain's orders were executed promptly, freeing him up to focus on broader strategies. Despite these successes, Kain still faced some challenges. He had not yet made contact with Aldrich Killian and Maya Hansen, 2 key individuals he hoped to recruit into his growing network. Their current whereabouts remained unknown, and Kain wasn't sure if they were even in the United States. During this time, Kain also arranged for the purchase of gambling machines and other equipment for his casinos. Since the equipment required some language modifications, the delivery took nearly half a month. In the interim, Kain focused on sourcing raw materials for his dessert factory and maintaining key relationships within his network. Even with all these responsibilities, Kain found time to unwind. He fulfilled a promise to his friend Carl by finishing a video game they had started together. However, Carl quickly lost interest after completing it, pointing out that several new games had been released while they were still playing last year's titles. For now, the Marvel world remained relatively stable. S.H.I.E.L.D. was busy dealing with Hydra and other pressing matters, and their surveillance hadn't reached the point where they could monitor every individual across the country. Still, Kain was always cautious, especially about the possibility of being discovered by the Sorcerer Supreme. With the Time Stone in her possession, the Sorcerer Supreme could potentially see into multiple future timelines. Kain feared that if she became curious about his frequent disappearances, it could lead to unwanted scrutiny. While the threat of death wasn't immediate, the idea of having his biggest secret exposed was unnerving. Despite these concerns, Kain continued to move between the two worlds, driven by the need to gain strength as quickly as possible. Compared to the ninja world, the Marvel Universe was far more dangerous. Alien invasions, the looming threat of Thanos' snap, and even the well-meaning but often destructive actions of the Avengers made the Marvel world a constant source of tension for Kain. Even staying hidden in a remote part of the country wouldn't guarantee safety, especially not for someone living in New York, a frequent battleground for superhero conflicts. Once Kain had all the necessary equipment, he returned to the ninja world to oversee the casino preparations. He brought the gambling machines and equipment to the town and had them installed in the casino. Once the staff was fully recruited, the casino would be ready for business. However, Kain knew that security would be critical. Casinos attracted troublemakers, especially those who couldn't handle their losses, and Kain anticipated many would try to cause disruptions. He also needed a professional manager to oversee the casino's operations, but unfortunately, Konoha lacked experienced individuals in this area. Kain asked Aya to start looking for potential candidates. In addition to managing the casino, Kain was also training the homeless teenagers he had recruited to work in his food factories. However, it would take at least 4 to 5 years before they could be entrusted with important tasks. There are too few capable subordinates to recruit, Kain thought to himself. If possible, he would have liked to recruit skilled ninjas in future like Kimimaro and Haku. However, their loyalties and circumstances made that difficult. Sighing, Kain considered his options. While some of his recruits had potential, they weren't yet reliable enough to be given major responsibilities. Aya was competent, but she wasn't someone who could handle everything. Kain was stuck in a situation where he had the money and the plans, but lacked the personnel to execute them efficiently. Suddenly, Kain remembered someone, Yakushi Nono. Known as the Wandering Nun in the future, Nono possessed significant talent and ability. She could become one of Kain's most powerful allies if he could recruit her before she fell under Danzo's influence and joined the Root organization. Based on her age, Nono would likely be around 10 years old at this time. Kain knew that Danzo had recently been involved in the war in the Land of Rain and hadn't yet begun expanding the Root. This gave Kain a window of opportunity. If Nono was currently attending Konoha's academy, Kain could discreetly inquire about her through Kushina, who was notoriously gullible and might not even realize she was being manipulated. Determined to act quickly, Kain decided to return to Konoha. The sooner he found Yakushi Nono, the higher the chances of recruiting her before Danzo could. With this in mind, Kain set off on his journey, eager to secure another valuable piece in his ever-expanding network. Chapter 28. Damn old man! After storming out of the Hokage building, Tsunade couldn't help but curse under her breath. She had prepared for weeks, meticulously planning every detail of her proposal for a medical system reform. Yet, during today's Jainin meeting, Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage, had outright rejected it without giving her a proper reason. As she walked away, seething with frustration, she heard someone calling her from behind. Tsunade. Turning around, she saw the man who had supported her during the meeting. It was Kaito-dan. Oh, it's you. What's the matter? Though still in a foul mood, Tsunade suppressed her irritation, greeting him with a calmer tone. He had, after all, backed her in the meeting. My name is Kaito-dan, he introduced himself with a polite smile. I think your proposal was excellent. Reforming the medical system could indeed save the lives of countless Konoha comrades. Tsunade softened slightly at his kind words, but he wasn't finished. However, Kaito-dan continued, Konoha is in a tough spot right now. The war has only just ended, and true peace hasn't settled in. I believe the third Hokage took this into account, which is likely why your plan wasn't implemented. Tsunade's mood soured again. She understood the village's precarious situation, but the fact that her long-prepared medical reform was dismissed so easily infuriated her. Even so, there are priorities. The old man just couldn't see the bigger picture, so he refused my proposal without any legitimate reason, she retorted, her frustration clear in her voice. Kaito-dan smiled awkwardly. While Tsunade could get away with criticizing the Hokage being the granddaughter of the first Hokage and one of Sarutobi's own students, he wasn't in a position to speak as freely. I'm sure the third Hokage had his reasons, he said diplomatically. What reasons? He just has no vision. Tsunade shot back, clearly not appeased by Dan's calm reasoning. As she vented her frustrations, Tsunade couldn't help but think of Kain. She had been waiting for him to return, eager to discuss her ideas for the medical system with him. Even though he was just a civilian, Kain had an unconventional perspective that often inspired her. She wondered when he'd be back. The two continued chatting as they walked, eventually nearing Kain's food store. Do you live nearby? Kato Dan asked, noticing her change in direction. No, are you offering to walk me home? It's not necessary. I need to do some shopping before I head back, she replied. Just then, Tsunade noticed several carriages parked outside Kain's store. Her eyes lit up. He was back. What perfect timing, she had been meaning to consult with him about her proposal, and here he was. Let's talk another day, Kato Jainin. A friend of mine just returned, she said, her excitement bubbling over. Friend? Kato Dan asked, but before he could say more, Tsunade was already making a beeline for Kain's shop. Curious, he followed after her. Kain. Kain, who had been busy instructing his workers to unload goods, froze when he heard Tsunade's voice. It was filled with such intensity that it almost sounded like she was coming for revenge. He turned to see her marching toward him with purpose, and instinctively, he took 2 steps back. Tsunade-san, what's wrong? He asked cautiously. Nothing, really. I just wanted to talk to you. I got mad at the old man today, Tsunade said, realizing she had come off a bit too strong. She softened her tone. Oh, and give me a box of chocolates. We can talk while eating. A box of 20 chocolates is 4,000 ryo, Tsunade-san. You're 1,000 short, Kain replied bluntly, holding out his hand for the full payment. Tsunade's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She had casually tossed some money in his direction without thinking, but clearly, Kain wasn't one to let such things slide. Quickly, she added the extra 1,000 ryo, not wanting to be mistaken for someone who didn't pay her debts. If it weren't for the fact that she needed to talk to him, Tsunade might have considered showing Kain a bit of her infamous strength for his cheeky remark. Once the payment was settled, Kain handed her the box of chocolates. So, Tsunade-san, what did you want to talk about? A box of chocolates can't be the only reason. Tsunade raised the report she had brought, waving it in front of him. I want to talk about what we didn't finish last time. Kain feigned confusion, his face deliberately blank. Last time? What last time, Tsunade-san? I don't recall any unfinished business. Tsunade frowned. She could tell he was pretending not to remember. He was dodging the conversation, especially since it involved Konoha's medical reforms. He had always been cautious about getting involved in Konoha's politics, and this time was no different. Don't act like you don't remember, she said, her frustration rising again. As a businessman, satisfying your customers' needs is your most basic responsibility. Ah, you're talking about that. All right, we can chat, but I'll remind you again I don't want to get involved in Konoha's political matters, Kain responded quickly, noticing Tsunade clenching her fists. But wait, is that man outside your friend? He asked, pointing to Kato Dan, who had been lingering outside the store. Oh, Kato Dan. You're still here. Though she had enjoyed talking to him earlier, Tsunade now had more pressing matters to attend to. She wasn't in the mood for small talk with Kato Dan. Just then, Kato Dan walked in, smiling. Tsunade, so the owner of this shop is your friend. I've bought chocolates from here before, they're really delicious. Kato, I'm discussing something important with Kain now. But, actually, why don't you join us? You supported my medical system reform in the Jainin meeting earlier, Tsunade said, tilting her head toward Kain to gauge his reaction. After all, it was his shop. Kato Dan raised an eyebrow, surprised. He hadn't expected Tsunade to be discussing such a serious topic with a civilian, even one who sold medicine. Let's talk about it inside, Kain said, not refusing the idea. He led Tsunade and Kato Dan to a small room at the back of the shop and went to make them some tea. After serving the tea, Kain got straight to the point. Tsunade-san, what's that you've got in your hand? This? It's the revised medical system reform plan. I put it together based on the suggestions you gave me last time. Do you want to take a look? No, that won't be necessary, Kain said with a wave of his hand. But you mentioned the Jainin meeting earlier. I take it your proposal was rejected by the third Hokage. At this, Tsunade's temper flared again. Yes. The old man has no vision. If we implement the medical reforms, Konoha won't have to fear casualties in future wars. That's a meaningless statement, Kain countered calmly. If Konoha could suddenly train 3,000 Jainin, then no one would have to worry about war either. Tsunade scowled, but Kain continued. Let's stick to the point. Tell me what happened at the Jainin meeting, only the parts related to the medical reform. Leave out the rest. Chapter 29. After listening to Tsunade's explanation, Kain finally understood what had happened at the Jainin Council meeting. Tsunade had spent several days preparing a detailed report on reforming the medical system, but it seemed that the third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, was hesitant. Although he likely found the plan beneficial, the costs involved were probably too high, and with no clear reasoning to reject it outright, he chose to delay the decision. However, for Tsunade, this issue couldn't be postponed. Her urgency likely stemmed from her brother's injury, which fueled her determination to push the reform forward. She believed that a fully established medical system would save many ninja lives, especially during times of war. If you think about it, the third Hokage shouldn't have refused such a good proposal. In the early stages, it doesn't require much funding, Kain said, stroking his chin thoughtfully. Kato-dan, who had been quietly listening, felt the need to defend the Hokage. From his perspective, Kain, a common civilian, didn't understand the complexities of Konoha's leadership. Before Kato-dan could voice his thoughts, Kain continued speaking. Tsunade, do you think maybe you overwhelmed the Hokage by proposing too much at once? Tsunade frowned at his suggestion, feeling somewhat puzzled. Overwhelmed? I only proposed what was absolutely necessary for the reform. It's not my fault the old man lacks vision. Kain shook his head gently. Even necessary reforms need to be taken step by step. If the Hokage had agreed to everything at once, you'd be overburdened. You'd be the first to burn out from exhaustion. He continued, laying out a more structured plan. For example, adding medical classes to the Ninja Academy could be one of the first steps. Assigning 2 medical ninjas to teach older students would be manageable, and it wouldn't cost much. In the aftermath of war, Konoha Hospital is still fully staffed, so it should be feasible. Tsunade began to listen more intently as Kain explained his reasoning. For the development of medical ninjutsu, you could lead that effort within Konoha Hospital. It could be done without disrupting the treatment of patients, and there's no reason the Hokage should object to that. Kain added, the first aid training you mentioned? It might be wise to focus on female ninjas, who are often more inclined to learn these skills. If some choose not to, there's not much you can do about it. But at least those who learn can save lives on the battlefield. He concluded, the key is to focus on the parts of the reform that don't require immediate financial investments. Once these initiatives start showing results and the medical ninja team expands, the Hokage will be more open to your other proposals. Kain's insight into the phased approach to the reform resonated with Tsunade, who now saw a clearer path to achieving her goal. She smiled for the first time that day. You're right. This way, I can make progress, even if it's slower than I'd like. But what if the old man still refuses? Kain replied in a half-joking tone, if he still refuses, it means the problem isn't the reform, it's personal. And if that's the case, you might as well quit and work for me. I'll pay you 500,000 ryo a month. Tsunade's eyes widened slightly, and she laughed. 500,000 ryo? Are you serious? Before she could entertain the thought further, Kato-dan interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Tsunade, the Hokage won't hold anything against you. Konoha Hospital depends on your leadership. Sensing the tension, Kain quickly reassured Kato-dan, don't worry, Kato-san. I was only joking. Even if Tsunade wanted to work for me, I wouldn't accept her. This is purely business. Kain's calculated response was meant to ease any potential suspicions Kato-dan might have. While Kain maintained a delicate balance as a businessman in Konoha, he knew that being seen as too close to Tsunade, a prominent ninja, could draw unwanted attention from figures like Sarutobi Hiruzen or even Danzo. Tsunade also realized Kain's cautious stance and chimed in, Kato, it's just a joke. Besides, I have a lot of work to do in Konoha. With the tension somewhat diffused, Tsunade shifted the conversation. By the way, Kain, are you going to treat us to some of those pastries Kushina was raving about? Kain raised an eyebrow. You also know Kushina. He then added with a grin, well, 100,000 ryo for the regular pastries, and I've got a new batch of premium cakes for 400,000 ryo. Do you want some? Tsunade coughed, nearly choking on her tea. 400,000? What are you, a bandit? Kain shrugged. You're paying for the best cake in the ninja world. A commoner like me can't just steal money from ninjas, can I? The conversation became more light-hearted, and they moved away from the heavy topic of medical reform. Kato Dan, who was still somewhat new to the dynamic between Kain and Tsunade, remained mostly silent. He was still getting to know Kain, and his connection with Tsunade was not yet strong enough to contribute much to the conversation. He sipped his tea and nodded in agreement occasionally, but it was clear that his presence was more as an observer. Suddenly, a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Kain's assistant, Miwa, entered to report something. Boss, there are 3 orphanages in Konoha village. Shall I take you to see them? Kain nodded and quickly wrapped up his chat with Tsunade. Let's go, Miwa-san. We should bring something for the kids. He grabbed a box containing several stacks of ryo, a total of 1.5 million, which he planned to donate to the orphanages. His intention was not only to help but also to build a good reputation. Feeding hundreds of war orphans for a month with that amount of money was a small price to pay for the goodwill it could generate. As Kain visited each orphanage, he was warmly welcomed by the headmasters. They were overjoyed by his generosity and made sure the children expressed their gratitude. At each stop, Kain discreetly asked if there was a girl named Yakushi Nono among the orphans, but he had no luck until the 3rd orphanage. At the final stop, Kain found a girl who matched the description. When he inquired about her, the headmaster explained, her name is Nono. She's very bright and was attending the Ninja Academy, but she recently dropped out to help out here because we're short on funds. She insisted on returning to help her friends. Kain smiled and said, it would be a shame to let her talents go to waste. Why don't I cover her expenses so she can continue her education? In fact, if there are any other children with the potential to go to school, I'll support them too. The headmaster was overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you so much, Mr. Kain. You've helped us more than I could ever express. Chapter 30. In addition to Nono, there were 2 other children who had the potential to attend the ninja school. Kain brought them all back to the food store. He understood that competition at the Ninja Academy would be intense, especially for children from orphanages. These kids would face many challenges, as they lacked the privileges that came with being the descendants of established ninjas, and the orphanages couldn't provide them with allowances like Konoha did for ninja families. Being a ninja required more than just attending school, it meant managing the increased food intake due to rigorous training and handling the wear and tear of weapons like kunao and shuriken, which added up to a considerable annual expense. Yakushi Nono, after spending over 2 years in ninja school, had already burdened the orphanage to the point that it struggled to make ends meet. That was why she insisted on dropping out once she realized the financial difficulties of the orphanage. As Kain took the children back, he considered how things might have unfolded if he hadn't intervened. Yakushi Nono, in particular, could have ended up being recruited by Danzo's Root, a secretive organization that preyed on orphans and underprivileged children with talent. Once they arrived at the food store, Kain offered them tea and desserts. Then, with a smile, he reassured the children, from now on, you can focus on your studies at the academy. Every month, my staff will deliver the necessary funds to the orphanage to cover your expenses. If you excel, there may even be extra rewards. The 2 younger children smiled brightly, filled with excitement. They were clearly more naive and inexperienced, simply grateful for the opportunity. Yakushi Nono, however, looked more skeptical. Her young face betrayed concern as she asked, Mr. Kain, why are you helping us? What do you gain from this? Kain leaned back, speaking confidently, I believe in your potential. You could grow up to be someone important, maybe even the Hokage or the head of the medical department. When that time comes, you'll know how to repay me. At the mention of Hokage, the 2 younger children perked up, enthusiastically declaring their desire to become as strong as Hokage. Yakushi Nono, though quieter, understood the weight of Kain's words. She knew that the orphanage's survival depended on his help. Without it, even her dropping out wouldn't have eased the orphanage's burden. She stood up and bowed deeply. Thank you very much, Mr. Kain. You don't need to be so formal, Kain replied. If you're interested in medical ninjutsu, you can visit the Kain Pharmacy. The manager, Mirai, used to be a medical ninja. Perhaps he can guide you. Kain was pleased with Yakushi Nono's composure. At 8 years old, she already exhibited maturity beyond her years, willing to drop out of school to support the orphanage. Kain understood that by giving her help she couldn't possibly repay on her own, he was ensuring her loyalty. With her intelligence and talent, she'd be invaluable once her emotional ties to the orphanage and her gratitude to him grew stronger. After a brief stay, the children left, and Miwa returned. She had visited the 2 other orphanages earlier, informing the directors about Kain's offer to sponsor children with the potential to attend ninja school. The news was met with immense gratitude. For the directors, this sponsorship represented hope for a better future for their children, even if, from the perspective of the third Hokage, it might seem a minor matter. After all, even after graduating from ninja school, these orphans would be genin with no inherited jutsu, making their prospects limited. However, Kain believed that, in the world of ninjas, money could solve almost any problem. He was convinced that even world peace could be bought, given enough financial resources. His faith in the power of wealth was reflected in his plans. His enforcer at the casino was Kakuzu, a ninja of great renown and power, proficient in all 5 elemental jutsu. Kain figured he could buy whatever skills or knowledge he needed from Kakuzu. Miwa, has the 3rd shop been set up yet? Kain asked. Miwa nodded. Yes, boss. The shop is ready, and we've hired all the staff as you requested. Good. Make preparations for the opening. I should be delivering the game consoles soon. Make sure everything is in order. Kain was strategizing carefully. He had decided to put the opening of his casino in Konoha on hold. Despite the potential, there wasn't enough foot traffic to justify it at the moment. He figured that opening a casino in one of the larger towns in the Land of Fire would be more profitable. Tsunade hadn't yet become the compulsive gambler she was known to be, and the other ninjas of Konoha didn't seem drawn to gambling as much. On the other hand, a gaming hall was a more suitable option, something that would appeal to children and women. That was where Kain saw his financial opportunity. Got it, boss, Miwa responded, leaving to finalize preparations for the game hall's opening. As Kain reflected on his progress, he noted that it had taken nearly 2 months to open 3 shops, not a bad pace. Still, he knew it was almost time for him to turn his attention to learning some basic ninjutsu. His goal was simple, to master the 3 basic techniques: substitution jutsu, transformation jutsu, and shadow clone jutsu. While these were rudimentary in the world of ninjas, they would be invaluable for him if he returned to the Marvel Universe. The combination of transformation and shadow clone techniques would be a game changer for evading detection. Even Shield would have difficulty seeing through it. However, he knew he had to be discreet. It wouldn't do to let Konoha's higher UPS become suspicious of his motives for learning ninjutsu. As a non-ninja, he could more easily fly under the radar, but if he became proficient in these techniques, it could raise eyebrows. I'll ask Aya first, he thought to himself. If she doesn't have a way to help, then I'll turn to Kakuzu. At that moment, Kain heard footsteps approaching. He was momentarily taken aback, wondering who might be visiting at this hour. The door creaked open, and Miwa's head poked in. She smiled cheerfully. Boss Kain, she greeted him. Without hesitation, Kain pulled out his submachine gun and fired several rounds at the floor in front of the door. His expression was cold as he demanded, "Drop the transformation jutsu immediately, or I will." Wait. It's me, Kushina." Miwa's voice suddenly changed to Kushina's. "I was just playing a prank." With a puff of smoke, the form of Miwa vanished, revealing Kushina standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock. The few rounds Kain had fired had landed dangerously close to her. She glanced nervously at the bullet holes in the floor. Had Kain's strange weapon hit her, the damage would have been severe. It was far more dangerous than any kunao she had thrown. Kain exhaled in relief, though his stern expression remained. "So it was you, Kushina. Do you know that scaring people like that can get them killed?" Chapter 31. Kushina sat down at the table, her head bowed in a posture of admission. It was evident that she felt remorseful for her earlier actions. She may not have many friends at school. If we look back at previous years, it would be accurate to say that Kushina has almost no friends at all. Kain had said a few kind words to her, treating her as an equal, which unknowingly led Kushina to see him as a friend. Unlike the gang at ninja school who often mocked her physical appearance, Kain offered her respect and companionship. Although Kain had scammed a considerable amount of money, Kushina didn't seem to notice, perhaps because Kain was adept at disguising his commercial motives. Even some adults in Konoha couldn't distinguish between his authentic praise and his ulterior motives. Therefore, it was no surprise that, after seeing Miwa leave, Kushina attempted to play a joke on Kain. However, Kain's keen instincts sensed something was amiss when he heard her call out, "Boss Kain." Moreover, it was uncharacteristic for Miwa to make such a childish move as merely sticking her head in the door, prompting Kain to see through Kushina's transformation technique with ease. "Please don't make jokes like that again, Kushina," Kain sighed helplessly. He felt a hint of annoyance, but he recognized that she meant no harm. It was essential to communicate that this type of behavior was unacceptable, especially given the potential consequences. He thought it necessary to learn some ninjutsu skills himself, if only to be better prepared for any future encounters. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," Kushina replied, her tone tinged with agitation as she lowered her gaze. She cherished her few friendships, and the idea of losing one over a misunderstanding was not something she could bear. Kain, however, did not immediately respond to her apology. Instead, he glanced at the damaged floor, muttering softly to himself about how much the repairs would cost, particularly given the bullet holes he had inadvertently created. Kushina, still bowing her head, picked up on his comments and quickly realized she should take responsibility for the mishap. However, she was unsure how much to offer as compensation. In her small orange wallet, she had a limited amount of money, but she decided to put it on the table, slowly pushing it toward Kain. "Forget it. Today was just an accident. Just make sure to pay more attention next time," Kain said, his tone relaxing a bit upon seeing the wallet. Upon hearing this, Kushina thought he had forgiven her. She raised her head, a smile breaking across her face as she reached for her wallet. Yet Kain was quicker, slipping it into his own pocket. He weighed it in his hand, finding it surprisingly heavy. "Let's consider this compensation," he stated. "Repairing the floor and replacing the hidden weapons will cost quite a bit, and I was so startled just now that I might need a hospital checkup afterward." "Do you really want so much?" Kushina protested, a frown on her face. She had only just filled that wallet today, and the thought of losing that money made her feel uneasy. "Let's not dwell on this," Kain replied, waving off her concerns. "Once I fix the floor and replenish my supplies, there will still be enough left over. I'll treat you to a meal, and that'll cover it." By now, it was approaching dinner time, and Kain wanted to put the issue behind them. "What do you want to eat?" he asked. "I'm in the mood for barbecue." Kushina's eyes lit up. "I want to eat barbecue too." Kain shook his head. "No, let's do ramen. Once my barbecue restaurant opens, I promise you can have whatever you want there." He wasn't rejecting her request due to lack of funds but rather his own disinterest. As a resident of the United States, he had tasted many varieties of barbecue, and he had no desire for Konoha's offerings. Kushina scrunched her face in discontent, thinking that since she had lost over 100,000 ryo today, she deserved at least a barbecue dinner. However, when they arrived at the ramen shop, Kushina quickly forgot her grievances as she happily devoured 3 large bowls, piling on extra ingredients. Kain couldn't help but shake his head in disbelief. She consumed so many sweets and meals every day without any visible sign of gaining weight. He wondered if the chakras she possessed had a good effect on weight management. After finishing her meal, Kushina clutched her stomach and bade Kain farewell, heading back home. It wasn't particularly late, but Kain decided to return directly to the food store. The recent war had just ended, and he suspected that many spies from other shinobi villages might still be lingering in Konoha. It was best for him to be cautious and return early. Upon arriving back at the Senju tribe, Kushina noticed the lights still on in her house. She lived with her grandmother, Mito, in the largest house in Senju territory. As she entered, she noticed that the lights in Tsunade's room were also illuminated. After the incident at Konoha Hospital, Tsunade had been dedicating herself to researching and developing medical ninjutsu, hoping to find a way to heal her brother Naweki's injuries. During her last visit with Naweki, Kushina had observed that he was recovering but sounded considerably weaker than before. Tsunade's advanced medical skills would surely aid in Naweki's recovery, and Kushina was confident that her aunt could work wonders. Having recently returned home from training outside, Kushina was aware that her timing might not be precise, so Tsunade and Mito were unlikely to notice her entering. After calming down from the excitement of dinner, Kushina recalled her small orange purse, feeling distressed about its loss. Climbing the stairs, she remembered the chocolate box she had bought and considered using it to bribe Tsunade. 1, 2, 3, they were stolen again? Damn you, Miss Tsunade! Kushina fumed, counting the chocolates only to find that 7 or 8 were left. The last time she had hidden them in the refrigerator beneath some eggs, but it seemed that her attempts were in vain. With a sigh, she reluctantly pulled out 3 pieces from the box, making her way to the kitchen to prepare a cup of tea. She placed them on a tray and headed towards Tsunade's room. Miss Tsunade, you've worked hard staying up all night. Here's a little refreshment for you, she said cheerfully as she entered, attempting to mask her annoyance. Upon entering, Kushina was taken aback by the chaos. The bed and floor were cluttered with scrolls and documents. Tsunade, who was buried behind the pile, had to stand up just to greet her. It's you, Kushina, Tsunade said, her expression shifting from mild annoyance to curiosity. Initially, she thought Kushina had come to confront her about the missing chocolates, but the sight of the refreshments made her realize the girl must have a favor to ask. Their relationship had flourished over the years, marked by blood ties and shared temperaments, allowing them to bond easily. Are you still studying medical ninjutsu at this late hour? Kushina asked, noticing the disarray around Tsunade. Not having a clear space to set the refreshments down, she placed them aside and began to assist Tsunade in organizing the mess. It's not too late, Tsunade replied, shaking her head in frustration. I feel like I can develop a healing regeneration technique, but this medical ninjutsu is turning out to be more complicated than I thought. Kushina sensed the weight of Tsunade's disappointment. She had promised Nawaka she would help him, and the severity of his injuries, a permanent damage to his bodily functions and nerves, was posing a significant challenge that typical medical ninjutsu struggled to address. Kushina watched her aunt intently, recognizing her determination and the burden she bore. It was a stark reminder of the struggles they faced and the bond that would keep them striving for a better future together. Chapter 32. Nawaka missed the best time for treatment. In the days following the operation, his injury had stabilized. Even if it were cured, Nawaka's body would lose the potential to become a ninja, leaving him to live as a common person in the future. Therefore, what Tsunade was currently studying was not conventional healing medical ninjutsu but rather regenerative repair techniques. Tsunade felt that what had happened to Nawaka was largely her fault. If she hadn't given Nawaka his grandfather's necklace, he might not have been so excited and careless, failing to notice the trap laid out for him. Now, she was determined to develop a regeneration technique that could provide Nawaka with a glimmer of hope for reclaiming his status as a ninja. Kushina, are you out of money again? Tsunade asked, noticing Kushina's hesitation, as if she were shy about requesting something. It was clear that the young girl had something to ask for, most likely pocket money. However, the costs had become exorbitant. Hadn't she just given Kushina 100,000 ryo a few days ago? Kushina shifted uncomfortably. I got into a little trouble today, she admitted, finally deciding to share the events that had unfolded. As Kushina recounted her day, Tsunade could hardly suppress the twitch at the corners of her mouth. What kind of precious wooden planks cost 100,000 ryo? A few hundred ryo would be more appropriate. And about those hidden weapons, while they sound impressive, I doubt they would cost nearly that much. This stupid girl just got tricked by that guy, she thought to herself. Kushina's description of the incident led Tsunade to think of cats, creatures that were often cautious around strangers. It seemed that Kain had acted similarly, likely taking all of Kushina's money as a lesson after being frightened. If the situation had escalated further, it might have turned far worse. Forget it. Let's just chalk this up to a lesson learned. However, you have overdrawn your allowance for next month, so you'll need to save from now on, Tsunade concluded. She fished out her wallet and handed Kushina 50,000 ryo. Despite not undertaking many missions lately, Tsunade had a fair amount of money from her work at the hospital. Many noble families from the Land of Fire would visit Konoha seeking her medical expertise, often compensating her handsomely for her services. With her exceptional skills, Tsunade had gained quite a reputation as Konoha's most renowned medical ninja. If not for her commitment to reforming the medical system and researching regenerative surgery, making money would have been a simple task for her. With her hands full of ryo, Kushina felt a wave of relief wash over her. Now she wouldn't need to ask Grandma Mito for money, she could simply rely on Sister Tsunade. Meanwhile, during his time in Konoha, Kain had generously funded the orphanage and invested in various businesses. He replenished several stores and opened a game hall, with plans for a barbecue restaurant and izakaya underway. Recently, Konoha had asked him to purchase another batch of medicine, though the quantity was not as extensive as previous orders. It had been over a month since the last purchase, and the need for medicine had likely diminished by now. However, while Kain was buying supplies, Sarutobi Hiruzen suddenly asked, "Kain-san, I heard you planned to donate to the orphanage some time ago." "That's correct," Kain replied. "During my travels for business, I've seen countless tragedies involving homeless children, so I wanted to help. Although the money isn't a fortune, it's enough for them to eat and have clothes to wear." Kain's expression revealed his war weariness, and even Sarutobi Hiruzen found himself sighing quietly in response to his tone. Konoha should have taken responsibility for these children long ago. "I never imagined it would fall on your shoulders, Kain-san. As Hokage, I realize I have been somewhat negligent in this regard," Hiruzen said, his voice heavy with concern. "Please don't say that, Third Hokage. I'm just trying to do my part, it's really nothing special," Kain replied modestly, though his words caused Sarutobi Hiruzen to choke slightly. Funding 3 orphanages would cost 1.5 million ryo a month, 18 million ryo a year. If it had been Hiruzen's responsibility, he would have been reluctant to allocate such substantial resources, particularly since it could fund Anbu's equipment expenses for 3 months. Following this exchange, Sarutobi Hiruzen steered the conversation toward Kushina. Kain responded casually, pretending not to recognize her importance, describing her simply as an ordinary girl with a knack for attracting wealth. Kain didn't linger in the Hokage building long. Most of the conversation had revolved around Kushina, revealing Hiruzen's underlying concerns. However, very few people in Konoha were aware of the truth behind Kushina's lineage. With the protection of Uzumaki Mito and Kain's recent charitable acts, Sarutobi Hiruzen did not press further. After Mito Kato Homura arrived, Hiruzen smiled and asked Anbu to escort Kain out. Once Kain had left, Danzo emerged from a side door of the Hokage's office, having just returned from the front lines. "Danzo, you heard what he just said." "Stop being suspicious," Hiruzen said, a hint of annoyance in his voice. Danzo responded coldly, "Hiruzen, you must be careful. There's no great mistake yet, but Tsunade met this man on the battlefield in the Land of Rain. We need to stay vigilant against him. Kushina is the next Jinchuriki for the Nine Tails, it's best not to let him get too close. This situation hinges on Kushina's own choices. Do you intend to control her actions?" Sarutobi Hiruzen shot back, his voice firm as he regarded Danzo. With a glance at Danzo, he continued, "Kain doesn't spend much time in Konoha, and when he does visit, he rarely goes out. You can't restrict Kushina from going to the dessert shop. If you believe otherwise, you should take it up with Mito-sama directly." Danzo felt a wave of frustration, he wouldn't dare to discuss this matter with Mito. If he did, she would undoubtedly chastise him for his concerns. Danzo's true intention was to cultivate Uzumaki Kushina swiftly, ensuring she could harness the power of the tailed beast as a strategic deterrent for Konoha in future conflicts. However, as long as Uzumaki Mito was alive, Danzo knew he could never be allowed to take control of the Nine Tails Jinchuriki. Hiruzen, Sand Shinobi didn't use tailed beasts this time because they couldn't ascertain the movements of Konoha's Nine Tails. If they learn that the Jinchuriki is unable to fight on the battlefield, Konoha will face dire consequences in the next war, Danzo warned loudly. "I have my own plans regarding this matter, Danzo. Our fundamental responsibility is to cultivate talent for Anbu while performing tasks outside the village. Please don't interfere with other matters," Sarutobi Hiruzen stated firmly, raising his voice slightly. Unlike the indecisive Hokage of years to come, he was resolute. "Now that I'm Hokage, I will handle Kushina and Kain," Hiruzen added with finality. Danzo clenched his teeth in silence, the frustration boiling within him. He had been sidelined this time, missing out on the Hokage position due to Hiruzen's assent. Tobirama-sensei, selecting Hiruzen as Hokage was the worst decision you could make, he thought bitterly. "Hiruzen, you will come to regret this," Danzo muttered under his breath as he plotted his next move. Chapter 33. Kain had meticulously arranged everything in the industry, overseeing the handover of medicines and other essential items. This time, Konoha had received funding from the daimyo, which resulted in only a small portion of gold being given, the rest was settled with currency from the ninja world. In total, there was an impressive sum of 70 million ryo. Realistically, Kain knew he couldn't spend all that money at once. He allocated part of it as preparation funds for store openings and reserved 2 months' worth of financial support for the orphanage to give to Miwa. Kain took the remainder for himself. In his view, money that sat unused was nothing more than wasted paper. As he made his way from the village, Kain began to strategize how to spend his newfound wealth. He decided to leave 20 million ryo to Aya to continue expanding her business in the Land of Fire. He earmarked 10 million ryo to invite Kakuzu to teach him ninjutsu and intended to use the rest to buy gold and jewelry, passing them on if he stumbled upon anything rare. Ancient artifacts intrigued him, and he believed he could purchase them all, then resell them to the Japanese people at a profit. During Kain's stay in Konoha, Aya had made remarkable progress. She had identified 2 suitable candidates to guard the casino and brought them directly to the town. Additionally, she recruited several wandering warriors and thugs, totaling 23 individuals. However, only 4 of these recruits possessed knowledge of chakra, and none were ninjas. Recruiting ninjas with knowledge of ninjutsu proved to be incredibly challenging. Generally, only rogue ninjas would agree to such requests. With the strict control each ninja village maintained over ninjutsu, it wasn't easy for outsiders to learn even the basics, let alone join a small ninjutsu village. Konoha was known to be one of the more open ninja villages for common people, yet even there, during their 6 years of schooling, students typically learned only a few basic techniques, indicating the high bar set for ninjutsu mastery. Otherwise, Kakuzu wouldn't have become a prominent figure in the underground gold exchange, as there were very few powerful bounty hunters like him. Good job, Aya. I truly feel reassured leaving the outside to you, Kain said with a smile. Over the course of this time, he had witnessed Aya's continuous improvement as she adapted to business management. At first, she had even inquired about the location of various goods. Now, Kain could trust her with many responsibilities. Aya, your salary will be tripled from now on, and the year-end bonus will be calculated separately, he declared. Joy illuminated Aya's face upon hearing this. Her previous salary had already provided a comfortable life for her children, but now, with it tripled, she felt she could consider preparing a medicinal bath for her child, a luxury typically reserved for genius ninjas. This was something she could finally afford with her new salary. As for dividends, Kain had given it some thought but decided to withhold that information for now. He believed others should work diligently for him for at least a decade before discussing dividends. Moreover, he intended to reward them progressively over time. The subsequent tasks would be straightforward. With staff, machinery, premises, and security in place, the casino would soon open. It was expected that initially, the customer turnout would be low, but with time, the nobles would surely develop a taste for gambling, thus increasing patronage. Kain planned to continue recruiting guards, as the town featured not only a casino but also a dessert factory and cocoa tree planting supplies among other shops. According to his calculations, 30 to 40 personnel would suffice to keep the peace and dissuade troublemakers. Later, Kain reached out to Kakuzu once more, but before Kakuzu arrived, he asked Aya about chakra and ninjutsu. Boss, are you looking to learn ninjutsu? Aya questioned, skepticism edged across her face. With Kain's financial resources, he could easily hire ninjas for protection. Learning ninjutsu at his age seemed like a thankless endeavor, yet she explained everything she knew about it. To learn ninjutsu, you must first learn to embody chakra and then manipulate it through meditation to traverse your meridians. Once that's achieved, ninjutsu can be displayed. Chakra is a combination of physical and spiritual energy, she explained. After providing this overview, Aya demonstrated the clone technique and shared the main points of the chakra refining technique, encouraging Kain to try it himself. However, Kain felt ill-prepared to tackle this challenge. Despite Aya's clear instructions, he couldn't grasp the concepts of physical energy and spiritual energy. He awkwardly smiled and asked, Aya, could you help me feel your chakra? Maybe if you could let it flow inside me or something. Is that so? It should be fine, Aya responded. She placed her hand on his back, refined her chakra, and sent it into Kain's body. Instantly, Kain felt a rush of energy pouring into him from her touch, a sensation both miraculous and invigorating. That's the feeling, he noted, as he sensed a surge of newfound strength. He quickly formed a seal, hoping to use this invigorating sensation to aid in his chakra refinement. At this moment, Kain perceived his body as remarkably agile and his strength significantly heightened. He believed he was on the brink of understanding the physical and spiritual energies Aya had mentioned. Well, Aya, why did you stop? Kain inquired, feeling the connection of chakra between them dissolve abruptly. He turned to find fine beads of sweat on Aya's face, a clear indication of her exhaustion. I'm going to take a break, boss, she admitted, her voice strained. Kain nodded apologetically, saying, "You should rest for a while. Let me know if you need anything." Regrettably, he had felt so close to successfully extracting chakra, but with Aya fatigued, he couldn't press her further. He was acutely aware that overexertion of chakra could be detrimental. The following day, after Aya had rested, Kain made another attempt to request her assistance. Unfortunately, the outcome remained unchanged. Aya fell victim to fatigue once more, and Kain was still unable to extract chakra. The repeated failures prompted Kain to cease asking her for help. This could be attributed to Aya's limited chakra or perhaps to his own body's limitations. However, once Aya transmitted her chakra, she would require a full day's rest. If this experimentation continued, she would have little time for anything else. Days later, Kakuzu arrived at the town after completing his task. Upon hearing Kain's request, his expression soured. "This matter? I just have nothing else to do right now. I'll attempt to transmit chakra later," he replied curtly. The situation was complicated, partially due to the box Kain had presented. Kakuzu opened the box Kain had pushed toward him, his eyes widening as he assessed its contents. "Let's see, over 9 million ryo, no, it's likely rounding up to 10 million. What a generous client." Kakuzu's mood brightened considerably as he counted the money. While he mulled over the task at hand, he reminded himself that teaching ninjutsu was within his realm of expertise. After all, he was a top ninja from Taki Ninja Village who had once fought against the first Hokage. Chapter 34. It feels good to learn chakra. After Kain returned to the Marvel Universe, he couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of excitement as he practiced using ninjutsu. Having come from an ordinary background, the experience of wielding such a remarkable, mystical power was exhilarating. This extraordinary ability was something few could even imagine, and Kain couldn't shake the thrill of learning to harness it. The amount of chakra he had acquired from Kakuzu was far beyond anything he could have hoped to generate on his own. Reflecting on it, he realized that comparing his abilities to those of a seasoned ninja like Kakuzu was almost laughable. The moment Kain accepted Kakuzu's chakra, it was like diving into a vast ocean of energy. He could feel every vein in his body filling to the brim with this life force, as though he had tapped into an endless reservoir of power. It made him feel, for the first time, something more than human. Kakuzu's transmission of chakra was continuous, taking nearly an hour for Kain to refine and stabilize the chakra within his own body. For him, the experience was transformative and awakening to a power that few outsiders ever experienced. Unlike the native inhabitants of the ninja world, who had refined this energy over centuries and generations under the guidance of the Sage of Six Paths, Kain was approaching this power as an outsider. As someone not of the ninja world, he had none of the genetic predispositions that enabled the people of that world to produce chakra naturally. For Kain, the process was laborious and required Kakuzu's constant guidance. Yet, it was exhilarating. After observing Kain's first few efforts, Kakuzu had even commented that, while he showed potential, his body wasn't exactly suited to ninjutsu. In Kakuzu's blunt words, even with considerable talent, Kain would likely reach only the rank of Chunin, the second rank in the ninja hierarchy. But Kain wasn't discouraged. After all, with the ability to cross worlds and seek new opportunities, he didn't need to rely on the conventional path to mastery. With this initial training under his belt, Kain negotiated with Kakuzu to continue tutoring him in ninjutsu over the next half-month, offering a sum of 5 million ryo in return. Kakuzu, enticed by the lucrative deal, readily accepted. To him, this was a far more enjoyable way of making money than his usual dealings in underground markets. During his stay, Kain focused on mastering the basics, learning the essential three-body technique and the shadow clone technique. His execution was far from perfect, but over time, he knew he could improve through practice. For now, Kain's chakra reserves were limited, barely enough to produce a single shadow clone that could last a mere 30 minutes. His chakra level was comparable to that of a 10-year-old academy student in the ninja world, and even that was on the lower end. Still, he was optimistic. In the Marvel world, where few wielded such powers, his current abilities would make him an elusive figure, hard to track and even harder to catch. Transformation technique, in particular, became one of his most valuable tools, serving as a perfect means to disguise himself and stay hidden. Beyond his newly acquired skills, Kain found himself in a relatively stable position financially. His recent investments were progressing well, and his pharmaceutical wholesale company was beginning to stabilize. Although he also owned a biopharmaceutical company, it was currently little more than a placeholder, an empty shell, as he awaited the right opportunities to grow it. On returning to his company, Kain reviewed a series of emails that had arrived in his absence. Most were routine updates on work and progress reports, but one message immediately caught his attention: a headhunter had successfully contacted Professor Maya Hansen. Excited by the prospect, Kain promptly sent her a collaboration proposal, keeping the tone respectful and sincere. Both Maya and her associate, Aldrich Killian, were people Kain believed to be crucial to his plans. With the email sent, he made his way to his pharmaceutical trading company, eager to assess the current state of affairs. In the few weeks he had been away, the company had made significant strides, particularly in overseas markets. Demand for pharmaceuticals was booming in Mexico, with local suppliers struggling to meet demand. Interestingly, Kain's company had managed to secure partnerships not with public hospitals but with private entities, including local organizations and syndicates. The marketing department reported that trade volume had tripled within just 2 weeks, yet the demand remained far from satisfied. Kain projected that, within a year, his company could dominate the pharmaceutical market in Mexico, with similar growth potential in Asia, Australia, and South America. However, this rapid expansion required a more extensive sales team. At present, the company only had 7 overseas salespeople, a number far too low to meet growing demand. After discussing with department heads, Kain outlined a plan to increase the sales team tenfold, believing that even if only a fraction of the recruits succeeded, the company's presence in international markets would strengthen substantially. With his company's immediate goals and future plans set in motion, Kain received an email response from Maya. She mentioned that she was also in New York and suggested a meeting that very afternoon at a coffee shop in Queens. The email included detailed directions and a specific time. Checking the clock, Kain noted he had ample time, so he finished his office work before heading out. Arriving early at the coffee shop, Kain settled into a quiet corner. Before long, he noticed 2 individuals approaching his table. He stood up, greeting them with a polite nod. "Kain Pent?" the woman asked, and Kain recognized her immediately. "Miss Maya, Mr. Killian, please have a seat," he replied, gesturing to the empty chairs. Maya and Killian settled into their seats, and Kain could see that while Killian maintained a somewhat gloomy expression, Maya appeared more composed, albeit cautious. Killian's attire was modest, likely reflecting the financial struggles of his organization. Kain guessed that while they may have been collaborating on the Extremis project, their funds were far from sufficient. "Mr. Kain, we've heard you've been looking for us for some time," Maya began, her tone direct. "That's right," Kain replied. "I'm planning to establish a biological research center, one dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of the human body and developing targeted treatments for diseases deemed incurable. Although the center is still in its early stages, I've already made considerable headway with preparations." He handed over 2 documents detailing his plans and the progress made so far, hoping to demonstrate his sincerity and the seriousness of his intentions. Killian appeared interested, flipping through the documents with growing intrigue. Kain knew that despite his ambitions, Killian's resources were stretched thin. His initial attempt to secure funding from Tony Stark had failed, leaving him in search of alternative support. Maya, meanwhile, looked up after skimming the papers. "Mr. Kain, I'm currently working on a project in collaboration with AIM. If you're interested, we'd be open to your investment." Kain met her gaze, understanding the significance of this opportunity. This was the opening he needed, a partnership that could propel his plans forward. And in that moment, he realized that this collaboration could mark the beginning of something far more significant than he had originally envisioned. Chapter 35. The Extremis virus, discovered by Maya, is a theoretical breakthrough in biological research. She has already conducted experiments on plants, laying the groundwork for more ambitious tests. If the human body's biological system is compared to the Internet, Maya's research essentially hacks into it, enabling modification on a cellular level. This manipulation bypasses traditional medicines, instead directly altering the body's natural defenses and immune functions. Maya recently accepted Killian's proposal to work together on the project. She realized that tackling the Extremis virus alone was proving too complex and that collaboration was essential. Killian, already well versed in her research, had followed her progress for some time, understanding the potential intricacies of her work. With this foundation of knowledge, he was an ideal collaborator. However, their partnership hadn't been a long-standing one, and with Killian's team lacking financial backing, the need for investors became urgent. Maya was transparent with Kain, sharing a substantial amount of information about the project. Despite her openness, Kain took her words with a grain of salt, intending to verify them through his own resources. Kain's chakra attributes mirrored Kakuzu's, possibly due to prolonged exposure to Kakuzu's energy. Unfortunately, Kakuzu didn't possess the Earth-style stealth technique that Kain wished to learn, though he was assisting in locating a scroll with that technique, albeit for a steep fee of 10 million ryo. As Maya finished outlining her work, Kain adopted a thoughtful expression, nodded, and responded, "I'm very interested in this project. I'd like to learn more about it, and if everything aligns, I'm prepared to fund the entire initiative, including facilities and equipment." Kain paused, then added, "However, I want a 50% stake in the project and 100% oversight of its progress. I've already been admitted to Columbia University with a focus on biology, so I'll be studying this field closely. I'd like to be kept informed as a partner in the research." Maya responded immediately, "I see, Mr. Kain, that you're a professional in this field. I don't foresee any issues with this arrangement." She turned toward Killian, who nodded in agreement. In truth, Kain's involvement added a sense of stability to their project. Their research was complex and cutting-edge, making it challenging to gain the trust of typical investors. With Kain's initiative and funding, they would no longer need to scramble for support. Though they were ceding a large stake, Kain's offer to provide full sponsorship was an exceptional opportunity. Any more demands might compromise Maya and Killian's enthusiasm for the research. As for Kain's wish to monitor research progress, that was an understandable request from an investor. It seemed he wanted them to mentor him, providing him with insights into the study as it unfolded. With all parties aligned in their intentions, the remaining negotiations proceeded smoothly. Killian's team was small, and Kain proposed that they be relocated to his biological research center, already under construction and slated for completion within 6 months. In the interim, he would secure a temporary lab space and cover team salaries. Without financial security, he knew it would be difficult to keep the team focused and productive. Finalizing the partnership took more than a month, with negotiations, fine-tuning details, and drafting contracts. Interestingly, Maya and Killian chose different paths in the collaboration. Maya opted to join Kain's biological research center, embracing a more integrated role in his organization. Killian, on the other hand, decided to represent his own team in the collaboration, likely preserving a degree of independence. Kain didn't mind this arrangement. Killian's motives were somewhat transparent. His resentment toward Tony Stark had likely deepened over time. Once the Extremis virus was refined for human application, Killian would probably be eager to confront Stark, driven by past grievances. Since Killian didn't count his own team members as a priority, Kain felt no responsibility for their fate should things go awry. All he sought was a perfected version of the Extremis virus. This enhancement could neutralize potential adverse reactions from transplanting Hashirama cells, and if the research proved successful, it might even counteract the side effects of other biological augmentations. Once the contract was signed, Kain allowed Maya and Killian to use the rented lab and covered the costs for additional equipment. Supporting a biological research team was proving more costly than he'd anticipated. Between constructing the research center, purchasing lab equipment, and acquiring materials, he had already spent over $1 million. Despite this, Kain realized that future expenses would likely increase as the research advanced. Following his investment in the Extremis project, Kain discreetly assumed a new identity using the transformation technique, enabling him to liquidate a collection of jewelry. This transaction yielded around $10 million, which he planned to reinvest in the research center. As Maya and Killian's team settled into the lab, Kain expanded his support staff, recruiting personnel in management, finance, and assistants who would report directly to him. His current income streams from his pharmaceutical trading company, private hospital, and stock investments weren't sufficient to sustain the research center's financial needs. And with plans to hire more scientists, he realized he would need to find additional revenue sources. He resolved to push his resources further, capitalizing on his shadow clone and transformation techniques to undertake riskier ventures and establish his presence in markets previously inaccessible. The Extremis project is secured, Kain thought with satisfaction. Next, I need to contact Orochimaru. His work should be advancing in the years leading up to the Third Shinobi World War. Connecting with him at the right time will be key. Kain speculated that the Extremis virus could have a complementary effect when combined with Hashirama cells, possibly enhancing each other's benefits. While this was a theory, obtaining samples for testing and research would soon provide concrete data. In recent months, Kain had frequently taken time off from his work responsibilities to focus on expanding his operations. He recognized that his burgeoning responsibilities might limit his time for formal study, though he was determined to continue learning. Although Kain wasn't inherently gifted with chakra, a fact both Aya and Kakuzu had remarked upon, he viewed biological evolution as a pathway to transcend his limitations. The extremis virus and Hashirama cells represented just the first steps in his journey to becoming an extraordinary figure. The World Trading System, an interface Kain frequently monitored, was continuously scanning for other accessible worlds. However, he'd only successfully explored one alternate world thus far and hadn't yet fully deciphered the trading rules of the system. If the process required years of waiting, Kain would intensify his efforts within the resources he had, focusing his energies on augmenting his abilities with Hashirama cells and the extremis virus. Yet he knew these enhancements alone wouldn't guarantee his survival, especially in a world filled with formidable threats. After securing his current assets, Kain meticulously organized his space backpack, filling it with essentials. Although his preparations were progressing steadily, he couldn't shake the feeling that his backpack, though packed, still lacked something crucial. Kain knew there was much more he needed to gather, learn, and accomplish before he felt fully prepared for the challenges ahead. Chapter 36. It seems business is booming, don't you think, Aya? Kain commented as he approached the casino. He noticed several carriages parked outside, a sign of increased traffic, and upon entering, he saw the place was packed. Tables designed for 10 people now held 20, and every corner of the room was bustling. The noise level made it nearly impossible to hear oneself think. Aya managed the accounts herself, handling the impressive daily profits that now exceeded 400,000 ryo. Given the sensitive nature of the casino's success, Kain trusted no one but Aya with the finances. The casino's earnings were substantial, and Kain was intent on leveraging these profits to fuel his larger ambitions. Buy all the buildings behind and adjacent to the casino, he instructed Aya, laying out his plan for expansion. Renovate the VIP boxes and expand the main floor. Spend the casino's cash reserves every 2 weeks on upgrades. I'll leave a detailed plan for you to follow. As profits grow, we'll gradually branch out, first across this town and then outward. Understood, boss, Aya replied, listening intently. She nodded as he continued. Also, set aside 20% of the revenue as working capital. To Kain, money was a tool, valuable only insofar as it could be converted into resources and influence. In the ninja world, Ryo alone held little power unless it could be traded for something meaningful. Since the casino's recent opening, its luxurious decor and unique gambling machines had captivated ninja and civilian gamblers alike. However, Kain was aware that copycats were already cropping up, eager to emulate the casino's success. But without access to the specialized gambling machines, any imitation would pale in comparison to his own establishment. Still, Kain knew he would have to keep an eye on his rivals. Once Kain finished outlining his strategy, Aya voiced a new concern. What about the casino over on Main Street? Kain paused, weighing the situation. Put that on hold for now. We need people we can trust and who are also capable. Do you have anyone in mind? In a world where loyalty was paramount, managing a casino worth tens of millions of ryo required trusted allies. Kain recognized that if his business was confined to this town and Konoha, he could handle it. However, as he expanded further afield, he would have less time for personal oversight. Aya had proven herself worthy of Kain's trust and mentorship, but he also understood that pushing her too hard could be counterproductive. After a moment of thought, Aya suggested, Boss, Miwa and Nanami are both talented, especially Nanami. Her arithmetic skills are actually better than mine. Kain nodded thoughtfully. I know them. When I get back, I'll see if they're willing to leave Konoha for this role. Miwa and Nanami were both connected to the Senju clan, though neither had any particular talent as ninjas. Nanami had even adopted a civilian identity, marrying outside the clan. However, they both had families and ties in Konoha, and Kain understood that they might not be willing to uproot themselves, unlike Aya, who had shown remarkable commitment. By the way, boss, Aya added, someone from the Land of Fire came looking for you 3 days ago. He's from Lishun bookstore and said he had something to give you personally. Oh? Do you know where he is now? He's probably waiting in Konoha. I told him to head there since I wasn't sure when you'd come to town. Kain nodded. It's likely about the release of the new book. Looks like I'll have to return to Konoha. As Kain considered this, he mentally calculated the timing. His 3 novels had likely been on the market for a while now, and if Lishun bookstore followed his advice, they would have included impressive illustrations to captivate readers. This representative had probably come to deliver the latest sales numbers, along with samples and revenue updates, and to discuss plans for the second volumes of each book. After briefing Aya on the rest of his plans for the town, Kain set out for Konoha without delay. While traveling, he contemplated the broader future of his business interests. With an official identity recognized by the Fire Daimyo, he could wield considerable influence, and even the third Hokage would have to treat him with respect. As for Danzo, Kain knew that despite his cunning, Danzo's influence was limited to Konoha's shadowy operations. Though dangerous, he was merely a weapon, wielded for Konoha's darker missions. Upon arriving in Konoha, Kain checked in with Miwa, who confirmed that someone from Lishun bookstore had indeed been waiting for him. Kain immediately asked Miwa to send for the visitor, and while he waited, he noticed Kushina approaching. She had been tricked by Kain on multiple occasions, yet she greeted him with genuine excitement. "Boss, you've finally come back," she said, smiling brightly as she approached his table. "Business keeps me busy, especially with so much travel around the ninja world," he replied, managing a weary smile. Kain's approach with Kushina had always been one of casual engagement, neither seeking her attention nor discouraging it. She was close to Tsunade and had considerable potential in the art of sealing techniques, making her an asset worth keeping close. "You get to travel all over the ninja world? That sounds amazing," Kushina replied, her eyes lighting up. "It's not as glamorous as it sounds, it's actually quite tiring," Kain countered. He decided to change the subject. "By the way, the game shop next door hasn't opened for a while. As my loyal customer, you can play for free for the day only today, though." Kain needed to meet with Lishun's representative soon, and he hoped his offer would gently encourage Kushina to leave. However, she shook her head, saying, "No, thanks. I'm not interested in that. Can I eat whatever I want in the store instead? 300,000 ryo, and you can have a full day of desserts in my food store." "A buffet just for you," Kain replied without hesitation. Kushina's face fell. "That's way too expensive," she exclaimed. "Last time, you even took my wallet, and you didn't even treat me to barbecue afterward." Kain chuckled, responding, "Correction, you were happily eating ramen last time. If we'd had barbecue, you might not have enjoyed it as much as the ramen. That's the choice you made in your heart." Kushina hesitated, caught in Kain's playful logic. She genuinely loved ramen, but she had wanted the barbecue partly to regain her lost money. His comment left her torn between her love for ramen and her annoyance over the money she'd spent. Before she could think too much about it, Miwa returned with the representative from Lishun bookstore. "Kain! I finally found you," the Lishun representative exclaimed, looking visibly relieved. "I thought I'd be waiting for months. It's been a long time since you disappeared." Kain smiled, gesturing for the man to join him. "Come inside, we'll talk in the back." They moved to a private room where they could discuss business matters without interruption. The representative wasted no time, explaining that Kain's novels had been a major success for Lishun bookstore. The interspersed illustrations, as Kain had recommended, had captivated readers and boosted sales, and his 3 books had become bestsellers. The representative presented Kain with sample books, revenue reports, and a request for the second volumes. Kain reviewed the figures, pleased with the outcome. He had taken a creative risk with these books, weaving compelling stories with the mystique of the ninja world, and it had clearly paid off. The earnings from this venture would provide another stream of resources for his expanding projects. As Kain finalized the business with Lishun, his thoughts shifted to his future plans. He knew he would need to devote more time to developing his influence outside Konoha. A recognized identity from the Fire Daimyo would open countless doors, and it would solidify his standing within the Land of Fire. His larger goal was clear: to establish himself as an indispensable figure, respected and feared in equal measure. With each step, Kain grew closer to achieving that ambition. Chapter 37. After the tea was served, Kain frowned slightly, sensing something amiss. How did Kushina manage to follow him so naturally, taking the initiative to serve tea and then sitting off to the side, watching with an inquisitive look in her eyes? "Mr. Kain, the sales of your 3 books have been excellent. The first printing batch sold out quickly, the second batch is nearly gone, and as I left, a third was already in production." The voice came from the assistant of the Lishun bookstore owner, who spoke with both respect and excitement. He placed 3 sample books on the table along with a share of the sales profits from the first 2 batches, pushing them toward Kain. Alongside the books, He handed over a passbook where the bookstore had already deposited Kain's share of the earnings. It seems your bookstore is making good money. So, you're here for the content of the second volume? Kain asked as he examined the passbook. The profits from the first 2 batches had earned him roughly 25 million ryo, which meant that Lishun bookstore had likely made close to 70 million ryo. This was a staggering figure, especially considering that the ninja world didn't have a huge reading population, nor the levels of literacy it might decades from now. The bookstore's confidence in Kain's work was impressive, and he suspected they weren't confining sales to just the Land of Fire. With their network, they were probably selling in regions like the Land of Lightning, the Land of Earth, and even smaller countries. We've done well, but it's all thanks to your incredible writing, Mr. Kain, said the assistant with a polite, slightly flustered smile. By the way, Mr. Kain, about the second volume. Just a moment. Kain stood, walked back into the house, and returned with the second and third volumes of his 3 novels, handing them to the assistant from Lishun bookstore. These are the second and third volumes. Each series will have 7 volumes. If Lishun bookstore continues performing well, I'll consider deeper collaborations with you in the future. After hearing this, the assistant beamed, promising to report back to the owner immediately. With the new volumes in hand, he left, eager to keep up with the high demand. Bookstores around the world had been receiving numerous inquiries about the next installments. Many readers, unfamiliar with this style of novel, were engrossed as though discovering a whole new world. Once the assistant departed, Kushina turned to Kain, her eyes sparkling. Boss, you're a writer too? That's amazing. In Kushina's eyes, it was extraordinary to see Kain treated with such deference by the bookstore staff, though she didn't fully grasp Lishun bookstore's influence. In the ninja world, there was a cultural expectation, originating from the daimyos and nobles, that writers should be respected. Even ninjas were taught to respect writers, as their works were seen as valuable contributions to society. Kain waved his hand modestly. If you study hard, Kushina, you could be a writer someday, he said. Though he didn't see himself as particularly exceptional, he was aware that the ninja world lacked cultural diversity, making it surprisingly easy to gain fame with his books. The popularity of his content filled with action and intrigue was all he needed. I don't think I could, Kushina admitted. I already struggle with my ninja school lessons. She eyed the sample books on the table. Boss, can I read your books? No, these are for adults. Children aren't allowed to read them, Kain replied, shaking his head firmly. These books are like forbidden techniques. Reading them could lead to serious consequences. But, to satisfy your curiosity, I'll let you see something else what a writer earns. He opened the passbook, showing her the figure deposited by Lishun bookstore. Kushina's eyes widened, her mouth dropping as she counted the zeros. This many zeros? She whispered. She remembered asking Tsunade for a mere 100,000 ryo, which had made her feel rich at the Ninja Academy. But Kain's earnings dwarfed that, showing just how successful he was. Boss, if you're this rich, why do you keep cheating me out of my pocket money? Kushina's initial excitement dimmed as she recalled a recent occasion when Kain had demanded payment from her. That's money for repairs and damages you caused, plus the psychological distress, Kain replied without any guilt. His finances were carefully managed, which allowed him to grow his wealth. He had no interest in pretending to be overly generous. He aimed to invest his earnings wisely, creating a snowball effect to build even greater wealth over time. Kain's focus was on the long term, reinvesting the millions earned from his novels to grow his business empire. In a world where most were stuck with traditional business methods, he felt almost futuristic, harnessing products and strategies decades ahead of the rest. By the time Kushina returned to the Senju compound, night had fallen. Not only had she enjoyed a free day of games at Kain's, but she'd also left with a pastry, a rare treat. However, her joy faded slightly as she entered the clan area. Grandma Mito's age had begun to show, and her talks with Kushina were mainly about training in sealing techniques. Noeki, her cousin, had returned from a mission and was currently recovering, his spirits dampened. Tsunade, meanwhile, was busy with her work, often leaving Kushina feeling isolated. The Ninja Academy hadn't been a great place for her either. As an outsider with a fiery temper, she struggled to get along with her classmates, who tended to tease or avoid her. This lack of companionship was why she liked visiting Kain's store. He hadn't mocked her looks or attitude, and he spoke with her like a true friend, someone who took her seriously. The visits cost her a good amount of money, most of which she borrowed from Tsunade, but Kushina didn't mind. When she returned, Kushina mentioned Kain to Tsunade, recounting his success as a writer. Tsunade raised her eyebrows, shocked. For her, 25 million ryo was a staggering amount. She'd have to complete 20 high-level missions to earn a similar sum. And the idea of him writing adult-oriented novels reminded her of Jiraiya, who had a penchant for such reading material. Kushina, your boss is right, Tsunade warned, a slight grin on her face. Don't be curious about these novels. They're not for children. It was clear Kain's books were selling incredibly well, but knowing they were adult novels added a layer of humor for Tsunade. After chatting for a while, she noticed something. Kushina frequently brought up Kain in conversation. Kushina, you've been seeing him a lot recently, haven't you? Kushina went silent for a moment. People at school don't like me, she said in a quiet voice. Ever since a fight with a classmate's older sibling, Kushina had noticed her classmates deliberately avoided her, or worse, talked about her behind her back. Tsunade felt her heart soften as she listened, stroking Kushina's hair. If anyone bullies you again, don't hold back. Teach them a lesson. And if it becomes a problem, come to me. I'll have your back, Tsunade said with a reassuring smile, her voice warm. Chapter 38. Time skip. How's the progress? Any new breakthroughs with the extremis virus? Kain asked as he entered the biological research center he'd established over a year ago. Currently, the sole focus was on the extremis virus project. Despite Kain's efforts to bring in more researchers, progress had been slow. Yet, he had managed to fill all management and logistics positions, keeping the operation steady. Killian, one of the lead scientists, sighed and rubbed his temples. Not very promising so far. We're limited by the data we've gathered from experiments on plants and animals. We need to start human trials to obtain more relevant information. Killian was eager for this next step, seeing it as critical to progressing. While plants and small animals had provided some insights, their reactions differed vastly from what could be expected in human tests. Without human data, the project risked stagnation. Maya, another senior scientist, immediately raised her voice, countering Killian's suggestion. Conducting human experiments now would be catastrophic. The failure rate is close to 90%, which would make human trials almost unethical at this stage. We shouldn't even consider it without more breakthroughs. Killian looked at Kain for support. Boss, if we don't start human trials, we might be stuck for years. We're at a deadlock, and without real human data, we're just circling the same results. Kain interrupted before the argument could escalate further. Let's file an application for an Institutional Review Board, IRB, review, he suggested calmly. He turned to Maya, who seemed slightly more at ease with this approach. This will allow us to conduct human trials with volunteers who understand the risks, and it typically takes about 3 months for approval. If there's no significant breakthrough by then, we'll consider Killian's recommendation. Though reluctant, Maya nodded, realizing the financial pressures and the need for progress. The IRB application would at least ensure that volunteers were fully informed and compensated, reducing her ethical concerns. However, she knew that recruiting suitable candidates could be costly, with each volunteer costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Typically, volunteers would be recruited from impoverished areas, but even then, finding willing participants might prove challenging. Once the human trials began, the costs of the project would escalate dramatically. If the current team couldn't make the necessary advancements, Kain planned to explore alternative options. The ninja world, he reasoned, held a few experts in human body research who could potentially contribute to their understanding. Changing the topic, Kain pulled out a university-level biology assignment and casually offered it to the team. Anyone want to help me complete a biology report? I've already studied the content, but I'd rather not spend time writing it. One of the researchers stepped forward, looked at the paper, and replied, $2,000. Done, Kain replied, handing over the cash. I need it by tomorrow morning. With that, he leaned over the experimental data, studying the latest round of results. Despite his busy schedule, Kain had been carefully following the extremis virus project, understanding its principles and mechanisms. In the past year, he had acquired 2 tubes of the serum and access to a full set of experimental data, fueling his determination to become stronger through this technology. After reviewing the data, he left the center, somewhat disappointed by the limited progress since his last visit. At Columbia University, where Kain was enrolled, he had quickly gained a reputation as the most elusive student. Except for mandatory classes, he would often arrange substitutes to attend on his behalf, keeping a low profile as he juggled numerous responsibilities. His pharmaceutical wholesale company was growing rapidly, expanding into the markets of Mexico, South America, Australia, and Southeast Asia within just 2 years. Revenue was projected to surpass $100 million this year alone, yet competition from other pharmaceutical wholesalers was increasing. To maintain his edge, Kain knew he would eventually need to develop his own products. For now, however, he planned to maximize his profits from the current market, reinvesting in the Extremis virus project as part of his long-term strategy. Thanks to his business acumen and stringent cost management, Kain's personal wealth continued to grow. With assets totaling around $700 million and nearly 2 tons of gold, his patience with the Extremis project was finite, but the financial investment was manageable. To safeguard his operations, he had moved into a larger, more secure residence with a basement that he converted into a hidden safe room. This safe room provided a place to retreat whenever he needed to shift between worlds, maintaining his anonymity and security from agencies like the IRS, FBI, or even SHIELD, which could potentially take an interest in his activities. Reflecting on his plans, Kain decided it was time to approach Tsunade about the Extremis virus and some unique treatments for terminal illnesses. He had maintained a good relationship with her, learning about her family's circumstances from Kushina. Nawaka's recovery, he knew, would pique her interest in the virus's potential. Kain had also brought along samples and data on various diseases, hoping to leverage her medical expertise. With that plan settled, Kain finalized his tasks in the Marvel world. He assigned a substitute to manage his affairs and replenished his supplies before shifting his focus back to the ninja world. In the next moment, he arrived there, ready to continue his work. Chapter 39. Miwa, isn't Aya here? Kain asked, scanning the room as he stepped into his office. Someone's causing trouble on Main Street. She went to handle it. Afterward, she might have to go to the Land of Waves, so she won't be back for a while. Boss, should I send a message to Aya? Miwa inquired, her head slightly lowered as she awaited further instructions. No, let her handle it. Other than Main Street, is everything running smoothly? Kain took the ledger from Miwa, reviewing the financials. Recently, he had noticed increasing interference from local nobility in the Land of Fire, likely due to his growing influence. While they hadn't acted overtly against him yet, there were clear signs they might soon make their move. The town remains secure, and revenue is increasing across the board. Other than Main Street, only the Land of Waves is experiencing issues. Miwa paused, then continued, there have been rumors that someone hired wandering ninjas specifically to target us. Kain's gaze hardened. Contact Kakuzu's team. Offer 7 million ryo, and if Kakuzu feels that's too low, raise it to 10 million. But make it clear that whoever is behind this needs to be eliminated. He closed the ledger. While Kain wasn't a financial expert, he had become familiar with the economic landscape in the ninja world. His ventures in Konoha weren't reflected in this particular ledger, but the figures showed a steady increase in monthly profits, now surpassing 70 million ryo. His businesses included 3 casinos, 4 dessert shops and a factory, 4 izakayas, 3 restaurants, and 3 food stores. Notably, the casinos accounted for nearly 70% of the income, while the other establishments served as additional revenue streams. Aya managed the bulk of these enterprises, operating with a level of autonomy. She had shown a keen eye for opportunity, expanding their operations significantly since the initial izakaya that Kain had established. Now, she was working on building a supply chain from the ground up, planning to buy grain directly from farmers to supply local stores and a soon-to-be-built winery. Kain had already purchased modern brewing equipment, as he wasn't satisfied with the traditional brewing techniques of the shinobi world. Lishun bookstore was another profitable venture, pulling in close to 20 million ryo monthly. Kain had provided them with 7 novels, and the bookstore had expanded to over 20 branches, with distribution agreements in other major countries. It was a highly successful business that dominated the market. By comparison, the annual allocation from the Land of Fire daimyo's mansion to Konoha village was only around 200 million ryo. Kain's personal monthly income was approaching 90 million ryo. While it was too bold to claim he could finance Konoha entirely, he certainly had the resources to contribute significantly at least during peacetime. Wartime, however, would demand an entirely different scale of funding, as expenses would include weaponry, ninja equipment, mission payouts, pensions, medical supplies, and more. During conflict, Konoha fully reimbursed ninjas for their gear and expenses. They also cared for the children of fallen ninjas until they completed ninja school or could support themselves independently. Without such support, the Will of Fire ideology would lose its meaning. Miwa-san, I'm heading to Konoha. I'll leave things here in your care, Kain informed Miwa, but she quickly interjected, Boss, please consider bringing the Konoha Ninja Guard team with you. Even if there haven't been any recent assassination attempts, better safe than sorry. Miwa worried about Kain's safety, knowing that if something were to happen to him, their entire operation could collapse. Good point, Miwa, but no need for it this time. My movements are hard to trace, he reassured her, hinting at the unique transportation method he used to travel to this world. His trading system's shuttle function brought him here, always placing him in a forest near Konoha village, which provided both privacy and security. You and I have limited guards. While your people are capable against regular civilians, they may struggle with bounty hunters. Consider sending a message to Konoha and issuing 2 B-level guard missions. Moving forward, I want 2 Chunin squads assigned to protect both of you, Kain instructed. Adding 2 Chunin and 6 Genin to their security would enhance their defenses. Konoha village would likely avoid assassination contracts against them, and other villages would have to think carefully about risking conflict with Konoha by targeting its ninja teams. Miwa felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, boss. I'll arrange it immediately. Please, though, be cautious yourself. Kain acknowledged her concern and, after delegating further responsibilities, activated the shuttle function of the trading system, arriving moments later in the forest near Konoha. Entering the village, he headed towards his commercial street, a project he had poured significant resources into. Over the past 2 years, he had opened 13 stores in Konoha, covering a wide array of goods and services, food, drinks, entertainment, clothing, and more. Though slightly off the main area, it was still the only dedicated commercial street in Konoha. The person in charge of managing these businesses in Konoha was Nanami. Known for her discipline and reliability, she kept operations running smoothly and was actively pursuing additional property purchases on the street to further expand Kain's commercial footprint. Of the 13 stores, all but the pharmacy had been doing brisk business, capitalizing on the lull in conflicts and the brief peace that the shinobi world was enjoying. Medicine sales had slowed, as people weren't purchasing in high volumes outside of wartime, but Kain was considering expanding his pharmaceutical business to smaller, less stable countries still experiencing turmoil. After Nanami reported the business details, Kain felt reassured about the state of his affairs in Konoha. However, he had one more question. Anything unusual recently? Nanami hesitated briefly before responding, there is something. Uzumaki Kushina has been visiting the stores daily, asking us to inform her as soon as you return. I thought it best to notify you first, so I haven't agreed to anything yet. Nanami was unfazed by Kushina's persistence. Though they shared a friendly rapport, Nanami's loyalty to Kain was unwavering. For her, nothing justified compromising his privacy without his consent. Kain chuckled at her loyalty. Thank you, Nanami. You did the right thing. He considered Kushina's recent behavior. Her curiosity and determination to locate him had undoubtedly grown, likely fueled by personal or clan matters. It was a reminder that his connections in Konoha were both a resource and a potential complication. Satisfied with the state of his affairs, Kain pondered his next steps. Though he had allies and influence across various domains, he knew he couldn't afford complacency. For now, his focus remained on expanding his enterprises and strengthening his network, all while navigating the complexities of the shinobi world and the looming challenges that might soon arise. Chapter 40. Kushina, don't worry about it. Just let her be, Kain said, then turned to Nanami. By the way, Nanami, is Tsunade still in the village? Nanami paused, recalling her recent encounter with Tsunade. Yes, Master Tsunade hasn't left the village. I actually saw her just the other day. Kain nodded thoughtfully. All right, could you reach out to her? If she has the time, I'd like to invite her for a drink. Let's say, in the private room on the second floor of Kain's izakaya. Understood, Nanami replied, then moved on to discuss other matters concerning their establishments. Kain's businesses in Konoha were thriving. All 13 shops he owned were drawing in steady profits, with only the pharmacy showing a bit of a slump. This wasn't unexpected, the ninja world had entered a period of temporary peace, reducing demand for medicine. Still, his other ventures, particularly the game store, dessert shop, and izakaya, had essentially become staples in Konoha's commercial life. These popular spots had made Kain's commercial street the go-to area in Konoha for food, drink, and entertainment. Even the typically reserved Uchiha clan members were known to visit for desserts, apparently drawn to the confectionery selection. As more people gathered here, his shops continued to flourish, and with that, Kain's influence in Konoha grew as well. Kain's reputation also extended beyond commerce. For over a year, he'd been consistently sponsoring the local orphanage. His monthly contribution of 2.1 million ryo allowed the orphanage to care for countless war orphans, children who would otherwise have been homeless. About 6 months ago, the sponsorship amount had been increased from 500,000 to 700,000 ryo to meet the needs of the growing number of children. Now, 3 orphanages were sheltering more than 300 war orphans, something Konoha's budget wouldn't have been able to sustain alone. The impact was visible. 13 children from the orphanage had already entered the Ninja Academy, thanks to Kain's support. Among them, Yakushi Nono stood out as exceptionally gifted, ranking 4th in her class. Though her performance in physical combat needed some improvement, she consistently topped her class in theoretical studies. She even took it upon herself to occasionally pass on small pieces of information she overheard at school, regarding the families of her classmates. Though Kain hadn't asked her to do this, he appreciated her initiative. After Nanami left, Kain waited for evening, hoping Tsunade might be available. He knew she was likely busy with her medical reforms, which had made her more prominent recently, though it had little to do with her reputation as one of the Sunin. Despite his frequent travels, Kain kept his Konoha residence meticulously clean and under surveillance, with cameras set up around the property. So far, no one other than the cleaning staff had trespassed. Soon, a familiar voice called out from outside, followed by a rapid succession of footsteps. After one incident involving a pricey situation, Kushina had developed a respectful habit of knocking before entering his home. "Come in," Kain called. The door opened, and a small head of red hair poked through. Upon seeing Kain seated at the tea table, Kushina broke into a smile, entering and pouring herself a cup of tea as she took a seat across from him. "Boss, I didn't think you'd be back so soon," she greeted cheerfully. Kain smiled, half joking, "What surprises me more is that you seem to know the exact moment I return. You graduated from the academy, right? Congratulations, Kushina." Kushina's face lit up with pride as she flipped her hair, revealing her forehead protector. "Yep. And not just that, I graduated 3rd in my class." "Impressive," Kain praised, reaching into a nearby box to hand her a piece of chocolate as a gift. Kushina's excitement deflated. She looked at him with an exaggerated pout, clearly displeased. "Boss, seriously? A single piece of chocolate?" Kain chuckled at her reaction and stood up. All right. Wait here, I'll find something a bit more special." With a hint of expectation in her eyes, Kushina sat back, watching as he disappeared into another room. Kain scanned his space backpack, looking for something suitable. After a moment, he emerged carrying an extravagant multi-layered cake. Kushina's eyes widened as she beheld it, her mouth dropping open in delight. "Boss, is this really for me?" she asked, her voice tinged with excitement as she restrained herself from reaching out too soon. "Yep," Kain said with a smile, setting the cake before her. "It's all yours. Just remember to eat it tonight, it won't last much longer." Kushina nodded enthusiastically. "Then I'll invite my teammates to share it." "Will you join us, boss?" Kain shook his head. "I'll pass this time. I have other things to take care of tonight. Go and celebrate with your friends." Kushina stayed for a while, chatting about her recent achievements at the academy, before finally saying her goodbyes. Kain walked her to the door, watching as she struggled to carry the large cake. The sight was amusing, Kushina, her face almost hidden behind the towering dessert, craning her neck to see past it. As they approached the street, Kain sensed a subtle shift in the air and noticed a figure lingering near a telephone pole in the distance. He nudged Kushina and whispered, "Do you know that person over there?" Kushina squinted at the boy trying, rather unconvincingly, to look nonchalant. "That's Namikaze Minato, a classmate from the academy," she replied, clearly unimpressed. "But he's always so shy when he talks, and he even laughed at me once." "What's he doing here?" Kain chuckled, "Maybe he's here to celebrate with you." Kushina scrunched her nose. "I'm not celebrating with someone who laughed at me. I'll see you later, boss." With that, she took cautious steps down the street, balancing the cake carefully to avoid damaging it. Kain stayed where he was, watching with a faint smile as she made her way home, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was on track. Kain lingered a moment longer, his thoughts briefly on Kushina and her growing skill and confidence. He turned, his mind shifting back to business matters. Soon enough, he'd have to follow up with Tsunade about the sponsorship plans and medical initiatives he'd discussed with her. For now, though, he let himself savor the moment of peace. Back inside, he resumed his preparations, his thoughts settling. Tonight, his work was far from over.
Thanks for listening.